Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to Car Chat, and I'm here with Jarrah Venables
Hi guys
and
girls
and anyone watching.
dogs. Anyone? Yeah, dogs tuning.
So I met Jarrah for the first time 2 years ago, maybe.
Yeah,
Maybe more
17,
actually.
I think it was.
Yeah, 2 years or so.
Yeah, it was spring 2017. Before I tracked it, Rockingham.
Yeah, and you got in touch through a group which was then called Global Endurance Legends, but
Yep.
we'll just not talk about Global Endurance Legends because it's now been renamed
Confusing,
Endurance
yeah.
Racing Legends.
Yeah.
And you got me down to do some photography. But and we've known each other since.
Yeah.
Spent many long hours in cars,
Yeah.
cruising to various parts of different countries. But yeah, Jarrah, do you want to give a little bit of an explanation of sort of who you are, what you do?
I obviously know my name. I'm sort of I suppose, car specialist. I get asked this a lot, and it's kind of amusing when people, you have to fill in a form. And I'm like, well, there's not really a job title for what I do. Kind of car specialist, I suppose. I do a bit of brokerage research, and sort of event related work, but that was kind of my background. So I spent probably more, people would know me better from my time at Goodwood, which I was at from 2005 till end of 13.
What were you doing?
Basically, I was eventually, after sort of 18 months, I joined as an assistant, and for the rest of the time, after about 18 months being there, I was responsible for all of the car content, and bike content at their events, which at the time were Festival of Speed and Revival. The members meeting didn't exist then. So that was doing all of the research for anniversaries, deciding what were going to be the focuses the following year, what cars you needed to get to do that in the best possible way, because we had to do it better than anyone else, obviously, what they sort of became famous for.
Is that quite a tricky job, or does it depend on, I guess Goodwood is quite renowned.
It depends on what you do. So, a lot of the times people would come to you sort of offering cars, but that was more for the revival, funnily enough. You had to hunt for cars more for the Festival of Speed. Also because Festival of Speed was kind of like the history of motorsport in motion. So it's kind of a little bit of absolutely everything.
Yeah.
And so one year you might suddenly say, okay, we're going to celebrate like the Baja. And you need to, people would never think to mention a Baja car to you if they own one in California or something. So you'd have to do a lot more research work to try and figure out, not the easy bit is figuring out what happened in history, right? Because that's kind of noted. But where are the cars now? Are the people still alive? That sort of thing, tracking them down.
Is there an insane database
at Goodwood? Yeah.
Of like who owns what and where it is?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, there is. I mean, at least
has this been copied and pasted into your own personal?
Yeah, I wish I was that tech savvy. No, maybe it is now some master funky database that they've got going on. But at least when I was there, like the database was, there were two databases basically, which was terribly confusing and inefficient. But there was like a spreadsheet database, which was more kind of revival focused, because we had pretty much the same list of races every year, or they'd alternate some. So you'd have like a list of all of the master lists for each grid. You go, okay, we're doing a such and such trophy, and here are all of the cars people have ever told us about, right? And that was quite useful because you could log lap times down and potted history notes about cars and so on. All you wanted to know was, what the car was, who owned it, what chassis number was, and kind of how quick it typically went around Goodwood. So kind of spreadsheets work for that. But the master database, which had people's contact details on, which you couldn't really use Excel for, was on an old Microsoft Access database. And that was incredibly inefficient. It was like designed 20 years ago, some vast expense, and it was ridiculously complex. We didn't use half the features in it. And it was kind of quite difficult to use. So we kind of had to use both of them. So I don't know what they're doing today. They may still be using the same things. But yeah, and I left and started building up my own database, and kind of quickly found the same problem, because basically for what they were doing there and what I do nowadays, you kind of need your own sort of bespoke database, but you can end up spending a fortune on that and it still doesn't do what you want. So.
Yes, I guess you sort of revert back to Excel and then try and...
Yeah, I use Dropbox and Excel heavily because obviously, at least in the brokerage sense, and in terms of like the Endurance Racing Legends sense, images are used a lot. So Dropbox is quite handy for that. Excel's kind of rubbish for it.
Yeah.
But equally, you're doing a list of like cars coming to an event or something, you want Excel so you can put a load of ones in and then quickly have a total of how many people are coming and that sort of thing. So Yeah, I wish someone did make a bespoke product, but it's kind of an incredibly niche. They'd sell like 5 copies globally,
and they'd have to be super expensive.
Yeah, exactly. So I muddle along as best I can. Right.
So you were in charge of content, and like I guess that's not the same as you might say if you're in charge of content now. That's probably different.
No, I mean now, like when we were there was a press department and that was sort of it. Now there's like a whole sort of, I don't know what they call themselves, kind of media department.
Media team,
that capture media and process it and put it out there and so on. And there's like 5-6 guys at least only on the car events. That didn't exist when I was there, and I only left 5.5 years ago. It's I focus on kind of everything and anything. So it was from researching to figuring out the cars, getting in touch with the people, getting them to agree to come along. Because there was no entry fee, and it was by invitation. But
is there still no entry fee?
There's an entry fee at the members meeting.
Right.
It's a nominal like £500-600 or something.
Yeah.
But for the Festival of Speed and Revival, there's still no entry fee. But in some cases, you're having to persuade people to come along from like Australia or America or whatever. Yeah, and half the time, well, not half the time, but some of the time, people go, "I've never even heard of Goodwood." If you're bringing them up in provincial parts of America, like one guy was like, I rang him up. And he was about 80 something years old, and I had to explain. I was like, Goodwood. He's like, never heard of Goodwood. Had no idea. And I was like, he's like, where is it? I'm like, England. He's like, what? Like, across the pond? I'm like, yes. He's like, oh. I said, okay. So, your passport's up to date? Like, I don't have a passport, son. I'm like, oh, okay. He's like, but I remember England was a really nice place. I'm like, but I don't understand. You haven't got a passport? He's like, I've never had a passport. I'm like, how did you get to England before? He's like, son, when I was last in England, we didn't need a passport. We just brought a parachute and a gun. And I'm like, oh, you're that old. Okay, fine. And it was literally ironically, that time we shipped his car across, and there was a problem with the boat, and the car arrived a day after the event. So that didn't work out terribly well. It's the only time a car missed the event. We used to have a little budget to bring special stuff across, like 20 cars from, mostly America. But yeah, it was that. And then there was, and in that there was like the hill climb and all the different categories of cars and bikes, and then there was like a rally stage in the forest, and then there was a concourse, and then there's like a display on the cricket pitch bit. So there's lots of different areas of content, and then there's a manufacturer element, and that would be like dealing with Ford or Ferrari or whatever, and saying, right, here are the cars representing your brand we want. These are the ones that we need from you, from your museum. And sometimes they'd be like, oh great, that makes sense. Other times they'd be like, well, actually our marketing focus this year's on this thing. And you're like, okay, so you have to do a bit of deal making.
So you bring that one and that one.
Yeah, we'll let you bring that if you bring this other one we really want. And so, yeah, but it was all of that. And then Revival was kind of sort of many of the same types of things, but it was easier because a lot of the people were more regulars. So they kind of knew the event. There's less explaining to do because it's hard to kind of explain to someone what the Festival of Speed is like from a participant's perspective if you've never done it before, because it's kind of unique.
Yeah, and the only thing I've sort of resoundingly gathered, other than it's a great experience, people love it, is anyone that's driven up a hill. So I've got friends that have driven other people's cars or driven a manufacturer car or something. They're like, yeah, I mean, it was great for the 2 minutes that I was driving up the hill, or whatever it is, a minute.
Yeah, 1.16 miles.
But the 3 hours that surrounded that of sitting at either end was not quite so good.
Yeah, and you'd have it with the people who are not familiar with the event, and they'd be like, so I'm coming all this way, all of this hassle and expense and so on, even if they weren't paying for it, the hassle. And they're like, so how many times do I get to drive my car? You're like, well, you get to drive it twice a day. Okay, great. For how long? Well, 1.16 miles to be precise. Plus a little bit of, technically maybe 2 miles if you include coming back down the hill. And they're like, right. And you're like, but there's a whole bigger event around that. So it's a kind of an amazing experience. And, you look, just come. You have to experience it. Yeah, well, that's the thing. There's an amazing party. But you have to experience it, to get it. And once they do, they're like, oh my God, okay, I now understand it. But if you just explain it in very literal terms, it doesn't actually sound that appealing. For all the effort.
Completely.
And in fact, a lot of mechanics kind of don't like it because you have to start cars multiple times and so on. And
it's probably not great for
race
the cars.
don't like sitting around and short. No, exactly. But it's incredibly special because it's where you literally get to see a history of motorsport in motion and in one spot, you know. And you get to see people reunited with their old cars or driving cars you don't expect. So it's its own thing. And the weird thing about it is when you think about it, nothing existed like that since. A few things have cropped up to copy it, and in some ways done some elements better or whatever. But
yeah, it's an interesting one with Goodwood Festival of Speed because I think it's an amazing event. And the first time I went, I was absolutely blown away by what it was.
It's a juggernaut now.
And then even like a couple of years later, my knowledge of what the stuff is, and actually even now when I go back now, I know more about all of the cars rather than just the supercars running up or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's almost like a victim of its own success because it was so good so early on anyway, and it always has the best cars that if you've been once or twice or 3 or 4 times, it's not drastically different than next year.
Exactly. And it's for a lot of people who come for the first time, you know, they make the mistake of just coming for a day or even 2 days, and you just can't see it all. It's sensory overload because, I mean, like you say, if you've been there 4 or 5 times, you know the bits that inherently you prefer, so you gravitate towards them, you skip other bits that aren't up your street so much. But the first time you get there, you just go, oh my God, where do I start? You know, it's it's a bit like sort of a car event equivalent of supermarket sweep or something.
Yeah.
But it's an incredibly cool event. But you know, it's massive now, and it's different to how it was in the first year. I went along in the first year. My dad took me in 1993, and it was a totally different event back then. The genesis of it was the same type of format. But you know, there were 25,000 people there, and it was maybe 2 days. If it wasn't one, I can't remember. And I mean, that first year, I remember she's now retired. The press officer told me they expected like 5,000 or 8,000 people, and 25,000 people turned up. They literally physically, because it was on the gate, you couldn't pre-buy a ticket. They literally ran out of tickets to give to people, so she had to bolt into Chichester and buy the only thing that resembled tickets, which are a bunch of rolls of raffle tickets.
Yeah.
So some people out there probably still got original Festival of Speed tickets, actually just random raffle tickets. And then you look now and it's got like 200 nearly 1,000 people, and it's you know, it kind of replaced the British Motor Show because that kind of died, and they sort of added on a day at Goodwood, and so it became more road car focused as well.
Yeah,
but it's a cool thing to see. It's
worth going. 100%.
Yeah, exactly.
There's something I remember we talked about a while ago, and I was intrigued, was when you were talking about putting cars together for, let's say, revival, and you've got the owners of the said cars, but it's not necessarily the owners driving them.
No,
and then it's not necessarily the person that they have chosen to drive them cars either.
No, and
Can you explain that?
Yeah.
Like, most people will be like, what are you talking about?
You have to be quite good at sales, I suppose, in that role, which I quickly realised. So, Festival of Speed, you know, there were 2 runs each day, let's say, so, you know, 6 in total, and probably not many of the cars actually ran against the clock. They were kind of running just demonstrations. So if you were bringing someone, let's say bringing an old Jackie Stewart Formula 1 car or something along, and you're like, hey, Jackie's going to be here on Saturday, it'd be wonderful to see him reunited with your car. And you go, oh, okay, all right, sure, it's not timed, you know, it's just a demo. Yeah. He's just tootling up the hill 1 mile, you know, kind of what could go wrong? Yeah, okay, there's a Flintmore was quite close. A few things can go wrong, I suppose, and they have in the past. But you know, it's fairly low risk. It is 1 car on track at a time, sort of thing. And there was a lot of that at the Festival of Speed, but it's an easier sales pitch. With the Revival, most of the races are single drivers. There are a couple that are 2 drivers. So like the touring car race is 2 driver, but in 2 parts. So like the famous drivers drove in the first part on Saturday, and then the owners drove on the Sunday, or owner nominated person. The TT always was and still is 2 driver 1 hour race. They added the odd race on a Friday night that was also 1 hour, but they kind of changed the type of cars they cater for every now and then. But they're like 2 driver, like you can drive with your mate, or you can drive with someone famous, or you can have 2 people drive for you. It's entirely up to you. The TT was always like, this is the jewel in the crown, and we'll invite a load of, you know, retired and or current stars along, and we used to have to find them a drive. And so, of course, some people are like, yeah, whatever, I'm just here for the fun. And others are like, right, I want to win, at all kind of costs.
Yeah.
So you have to kind of go, okay, well, that guy's really precious about his car, understandably, because it's super original and not very competitive. So we'll put the guy who doesn't care about being quick in that. He's just coming along for the party. The guy who's super competitive and wants to win. Okay, we need to find, this or this or this, get him a seat in one of those because they're the front runners. But sometimes the owner will be like, I don't want a BTCC driver in my $5 million car or pound car.
I've seen how they drive.
Yeah, and equally, you get another BTCC driver who's incredibly sympathetic and mechanically kind, and so there was a lot of you sort of like I'd anyway prefer having people we'd had for a few years who kind of proven themselves not to be reckless, to be respectful of not just cars because they're valuable, but because they're historically significant. I mean, I think in recent years it's changed and people have built replicas of original cars and keep the original ones in the garage and race the replicas.
We should come back
and they're kind of open about it, yeah. And other cars that have been built up from a road car, so they are an original car, but they didn't have a racing history and period. And equally, the mix of drivers has maybe changed a bit, and so it's sort of it's somewhat changed now. And there are a lot of owners because values. Also, because of the market performance, values went up massively in the last sort of 15 years or so. And so a lot of owners are like, I'm just not happy having some guy, even if he is a very good, like Le Mans winner or whatever, in my car. I don't kind of really know him. I'd rather have someone in with me who I know, and in some cases, an owner would build up a relationship by a chance encounter. With someone we placed in their car, and then they became really great friends, and they were always, every year they're like, okay, I want to have this guy in my car, and it just kind of worked out nicely. But it became harder and harder as values kind of went up and up and up, and owners are like, look, I'm only coming if I can pick my driver.
Yeah.
And that's, I suppose, just how it changed,
And then I guess you've got all these cars that on paper are worth a ton of money.
Yeah.
In theory.
Hundreds of millions at one point, I think. And literally for a grid, it was like, we tallied it up roughly, and it was like, wow, this is probably worth like $250 million.
Yeah.
And 30 cars.
Yeah, that would be an expensive crash. But then a flip side that I bring to people's attention when people sort of ask me about this is you may be racing a car that's worth, let's just pick a value, £10 million. It doesn't cost £10 million to rebuild it.
No.
So when you see that car crash, and I think people do like really quite enjoy seeing an expensive car crash, like this, it's not a nice thing, but a lot of people are like, ha ha ha.
There's a spectacle
that guy just
about
stuffed his very expensive car.
Yeah.
Like,
and then you get people going, oh, it wasn't the original one, it was a copy.
Well, that's it. Yeah. But then it may cost £200,000 to rebuild.
Yeah, we looked at this for at least when I was at Goodwood, for insurance, funnily enough, for the cars that we used to bring across to the Festival of Speed, let's say. We're like, let's say, I don't know, it's being brought across by sea freight and the crane drops a container and it, half destroys a car or totally destroys a car, What would it take, to rebuild a car if it was pretty much all gone? You couldn't salvage much of it. And we went to a bunch of specialists and they're like, look, even, some incredible cars. This was like 15 years ago, mind. About that. They were like, you're going to struggle to spend more than £300,000 to £500,000, even on like an amazing concours car, let alone a racing car, just in terms of the costs of fabricating it, the man hours and so on. And of course, some of that is that was relative, approximate rather. And in some cases, if something had a really special engine or something, it might be complex or one of only so many. It's going to vary. But you're right. A lot of the value of cars, it's like watches. I don't know, like a Submariner Rolex from, I don't know, 1980 something or 2000 and something might be worth 20 grand, but intrinsically it's not technically really. Maybe the movement might be slightly different or something, but it's not going to be any different than one 10 years later or something. But maybe one's an anniversary or one's one of so many, and that commands a massive premium. It's kind of the same with cars. They'll drive the same, but one and maybe they're one of a certain run, right? But one that was driven by, I don't know, Sterling Moss might be worth 50% or 100% more and won a certain race than a car that didn't.
It's sister car. Yeah.
That's what people pay for. And of course, so when you crash a car, you'll only do so much damage rather in terms of cost of repairing it, but what you can do is wipe a lot of the value off it, theoretically, if you have to replace a bunch of the parts and people are like, okay, well, that was the car that Moss drove to victory in this certain race. Now you've just replaced the body on it, so that's a lot less original.
It's a really funny sort of world, that, because, okay, these like race cars, and okay, quite a lot of them, they're old enough that you can drive them on the road.
Yeah.
So people can drive them on the road. Yeah. Which means you get a lot of enjoyment out of them. Up
to a certain point in time, race cars were kind of, unless it was Formula One, were road usable cars, you know? And so it was really probably late 60s, I'd say, something like that, that even the sort of prototype cars started really being too extreme for the road.
Yeah.
Or certainly by the mid 70s. And in fact, you know, there was kind of really once tyre technology changed and you went from like slicks, treaded tyres to slick, rather than slicks or wet, you know, then that was kind of a big separation.
Yeah.
I think.
And then you get, so we've got these cars that can be driven on the road. So if you're an owner, you can drive these race cars.
Yeah. You know, a lot of people do.
250 GTO, whatever, you can drive it on the road, no problem. Once you can't drive it on the road, the only place you can drive it is on the track or race it. Now, if it's expensive to run, I would say people are probably more inclined to just race it. I don't know. That'd be an interesting one to find out.
Yeah, it depends on the cars. I mean, some have become kind of literally like trophy assets in a way.
Yeah.
Like expensive art or something, you know, that like some of the most expensive paintings in the world, people don't actually look at. They're locked away in a vault. It's not dissimilar with certain cars. Like some of the most famous racing cars in the world are now so valuable that they never see a racetrack.
Yeah,
in fact, they rarely even get used on the road. They're just there, and that's the such and such thing that went for so many $1 million or whatever, which is kind of a shame. And in fact, if you look at race results from like 50s or 60s or whatever, and you look at a typical grid for the same period and category, like class of racing cars, it might look very different in terms of the entry list, because you're missing loads of the most valuable cars now. And you're like, well, these ones are now really competitive. They weren't so competitive back in the day. It might be because you're missing a load of Ferraris that were dominant that are now so valuable. People don't race them.
You're not going to race them.
No.
But if you do want to race a car, you're not really, the only thing you're really bothered about is like how well it handles and how fast it goes. And like, if it's still, you know, you still want it to be like historically, I think it should be historically accurate if you're racing in the historic racing stuff. But if you have bought that car with the engine that whatever did 1X race, it would be really quite bad on the values if you blew that engine up.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you might put another one in.
Exactly. And I mean, the American, I think concourse scene started this to a degree. There's some matching numbers thing. And now it's like first paint with newer cars anyway, which always makes me laugh a bit. And I think once the cars started really going up in value a lot, people started to look for differentiating factors from an investment perspective. And that was the fact that it might have been matching numbers, engine, gearbox, but, you know, or sometimes body had a number or whatever, original body, let's say, from when it rolled out of the factory. And then in more recent times, it's, you know, at least with road cars, it's like, oh, is it first paint? And, you know, or if it's an F40, oh, you can see the weave. I mean, you know, it's like...
It was a particularly bad paint job.
Yeah, that's kind of it. You know, it's like, well, actually in most terms, if you're like, you're painting your wall or something, and you're like, well, I can still see the primer under that.
Yeah.
You know, if that was an F40, you'd be like, you can still see the primer on that
Don't
one.
touch
That's
that.
a really fantastic one. That's first paint.
Repaint.
Yeah, exactly. You'd be just like, you did a really rubbish job on that. Can you do it again? And it might be because, you know, the paint technology, the paint machines were bad or whatever. But, you know, that's kind of, people look for differentiating factors.
Or you've been throwing some plates around the room and you've chipped this wall.
Yeah.
Don't ever fix it.
Exactly.
It's pretty novel.
And so that came in with racing. And so what people did, if they had the wherewithal, is they'd buy a whole separate engine. They'd take their original engine out, they'd put it in a crate, they'd buy a new one or have one built up to go racing with. So that if they, you know, threw a rod out the side or their crank split and took out the engine, it wasn't destroyed because they were concerned about the value mostly. Some people they genuinely, absolutely, it's about an originality thing for them.
Yeah. Almost
as much as it is a value thing. But I think that, the investment side has kind of changed people's approach to a degree. And, you know, that it's like, people say, well, why did you leave Goodwood? And it's like, well, they're like, surely that's the best place on earth to work if you like car events. I'm like, well, yeah, it was amazing.
Good events to go
I
to.
loved my time there. I really did. But it's kind of like, if you drive the best car, your dream car, on your dream track.
Have you done that?
A couple of them, yeah. Yeah. Which I never thought would happen. And it was kind of, and I didn't capture them on video in a couple of cases. And I'm now like, did it really happen? I'm kind of, maybe it was a dream. But like the first 10 laps or so, 20 laps would be mind blowing and amazing. And, you're in nirvana. But if you had to do like 100 laps, eventually you're like, okay, I'm not so special now. It becomes a bit familiar, and it's not so special because of the familiarity and the repetition. It was kind of like that at Goodwood. I'd done loads of amazing celebrations and met all of the famous drivers I could, more than I imagined I would anyway. And you created amazing moments in time and so on. And eventually you're kind of like baking a cake with the same ingredients. There's only so many different variations.
Been there, done that.
Yeah. And I always thought, once it becomes a bit familiar and repetitive, like that's time to stop and change. And I noticed that like 2 years before I left. It took me that long to figure out what the next step was, because it's a bit like, just imagine if like that job to me in event terms was a bit like driving for Ferrari in Formula One. Like,
that's it.
Yeah.
Where do you go?
And there's inherent kind of concern that the next step is going to be like Minardi, but the Minardi equivalent in Formula 2 or whatever. And so the more I thought about it, the more I was like, okay, well, what do I want? I want some more variety, a bit more independence, that sort of thing. And I was like, well, the only way to achieve this is to kind of do something by myself, which is pretty daunting. But eventually I was like, well, I suppose I'm relatively young, and, if it doesn't work out, I've got time,
You can always go back to doing something like that.
Exactly. And that was 5.5 years ago. And it's, I don't know where the time's gone, to be honest. It's been great. So, and the good thing is I get to go back to Goodwood now and actually enjoy the events. Before I used to actually really like the TV highlights show because I got to see the event. Yeah. I used to spend the whole time pretty much looking at the floor, either on my phone or on a radio. Yeah. And I just not, it'd be awkward when we come to like the prize giving things. Like, who should we give the special award for driving such and such to? And I'm like, I don't know, I didn't see anything. Yeah. So it's nice now.
Did you think along with that, working for Goodwood and stuff, did you feel like your love of those cars was slowly waning over time because of the familiarity aspect?
I suppose not love waning. I suppose because it's always there. I love cars, all sorts of cars, different reasons and so on. But I certainly became more blasé about it. Yeah. It's like before I was at Goodwood, if I'd have seen, I don't know, like a short wheelbase Ferrari or let's say 250 GTO, people would be more familiar with that. I'd be like, oh my God, that's like the holy grail of collecting cars to most people.
Unbelievable.
Right? I'd be a drooling kind of, embarrassing wreck and be like, oh, it's amazing. Oh, can I touch it? And I grew up around that old car scene, but they'd still kind of instill awe in me. But actually, by the time I kind of left Goodwood, I'm like, oh, you got a 250 GTO. Yeah, it's one of 50-ish, nearly late 40s,
I've seen 40 of them or whatever.
Yeah, I've seen a bunch of them, oh, great, okay. And it's, if you listen to yourself, eventually you're like, what are you saying? Yeah. It's like, oh, another such and such. It's like, yes, it's incredible. It's amazing. It's not, but you do get blasé. The more, it's the same with famous people.
Exposure to anything.
It's the same. It's like people are, oh, you starstruck around all of these famous drivers. I'm like, well, not really, because A, you get to know them eventually, and then they're not kind of not famous anymore. They're just people you know. Yeah. And B, the more famous people you're around, it's like, oh yeah, you won Indy or Le Mans. Yeah, he's won it 6 times. Yeah. Like you've only won it once. I mean, not you say that to people, but you like in your head, you're like, you're great, but like they're all great legends in a room in some way, shape, or form. And the key thing is they're all nice people. Well, some of them aren't, but most of them are. And it's like people are like, you must have an amazing autograph collection. I'm like, not really. I've never asked for an autograph. It doesn't have any meaning to me personally. I get it for a lot of people, but for me, having afternoon tea with, I don't know, Sterling Moss or Tom Christensen or someone like that, just because you've got 5 minutes to kill and just have a random chat, is more special and memorable than anything that could have a physical form to me.
I slightly wish I had more photos of meeting when I've like hung out with people or met people or something. Like you have a good time with someone and you spend like half a day with someone who you've just had a great time. And this applies to anyone actually. Yeah. This is not famous people specific or whatever. No. But just like have a little photo at the end of the day, just the two of you.
You know, I think there's two types of people. There's a type of people who consciously try and capture those moments, maybe for boastful reasons, I don't know. But we've all got, I think, one of those friends who's like, here's me with so-and-so, here's me doing this, here's me doing that.
No need.
I'm the category of like, actually, I've got almost no photos of me because I don't particularly love being in front of the camera. And so I'm like, no, I'll take a photo of everyone. I'm like that guy who, and so, I should have loads of photos of me with all of these famous people and so on. And I'm like, actually, I've got none. And it would seem kind of, at the time, it seemed really kind of awkward to be like, hey, let's get a photo together. That's the only thing I suppose I regret, only from a personal, not because I want to show anyone, just kind of look through and go, oh yeah, I remember that thing we did or whatever.
It's something like I'm pretty good at is taking photos when I'm at places now.
Yeah.
Because not as if it's for anyone else or something, but I've realized because I am taking photos for other people a lot.
Yeah.
When I go to, let's say, an event with you, I've taken tons of pictures of the cars on track or whatever.
Yeah.
But like there might have been none of us like messing around, going to visit the town like Venables or whatever. And then you do take those photos and you look back and you go like, well, those are the ones that actually mean something from that trip. So I need to do more of those. And I now try.
Yeah.
I mean, try.
You're good at taking good photos. I'm great at taking photos, but just rubbish ones.
But I push everyone to do it now.
Yeah, it's right.
And they go, oh, like quite often I get it if I'm going somewhere where people will say, oh, but you'll take the photos. I'm like, yeah, but you'll get a lot of enjoyment out of capturing the things that you want to capture.
It's true because everyone's got their own kind of way of doing stuff, right? I mean, although that said, there's some things from Goodwood that I'm kind of glad there aren't photos from. Like, one or two things that didn't, at least that time, didn't go quite so smoothly. Usually before the public turned up. They're.
So you were saying you've driven some stuff or got to drive some stuff. Have you got like any notable? Because you've done quite a bit of classic racing actually.
Yeah, I've been sort of massively lucky, ridiculously actually, if I think about it. And it kind of is easy to just be like, yeah, I've raced a bit, and I suppose it can come across as a bit arrogant actually, and it's really not meant to be. It's just the familiarity thing we talked about. But yeah, so I'd never karted. I wanted to. My dad was a mechanic on old cars, right? So I grew up around, initially when I was quite young, like lots of pre-war cars and then 50s and 60s cars, which are his kind of thing. And I was like, I want to be a racing driver. And he's like, well, a bit of a problem with that. We've got, we're not super wealthy. I'm like, oh, okay. So maybe you should try working on the cars instead. I'm like, okay. So I took my bike apart at age 8 and couldn't remember how it went back together. So it was at that point I realized I didn't inherit his natural knack for mechanical things. So I'm like, okay, well, maybe really a driving, job is kind of the best thing. And he's like, no, I've told you, forget that. You need to do karting. We don't have the money for that. Forget it. I'm like, oh, okay. So I was kind of frustrated to want to be kind of, karting star that never kind of actually got to a kart. So eventually I got my race license. And my dad was like, well, what are you going to race? I'm like, oh, I don't know. Stuff will come up. But at least I have my race license and I'm like a racing driver, right? And eventually, kind of lucky, one of his customers was like, hey, I've got this old race car, why don't you drive that? It's a death trap, a Formula V thing, actually. But I appreciated the opportunity. It very nearly put me off for life, actually. It was so bad. But then another one of his customers was like, hey, I want to do a season of historic racing in a 50s Jaguar, but I can't actually make half the races. So he was going to do it with his son. So he's like, well, I'll just enter it. Why don't you two do it? Okay. And that kind of went fairly well.
Wait, so you did this with your dad?
No. It was my dad looked after the car, and it was with his customer's son. Yeah.
Oh, that is an unreal.
I know. I couldn't quite believe it at the time. I was like, I've been asked to drive someone's car. Does this mean I'm professional? Wait, no, I'm not paid. Okay, well, I'm still happy with it.
You're basically professional at that point.
Yeah, exactly. I was kind of counting it as professional. And so that kind of went well. And then it was a couple other cars after that. And then some of my dad's customers asked, so why don't you test my car or whatever. And it kind of went from there. And I never asked for a drive. partially because initially it was a bit awkward. It was like, well, who are you? I'm like, well, I'm a nobody kind of driver. So it was a bit not like, hey, I'm, such and such championship winning driver. And then it just got to the point, particularly when I was at Goodwood, like I didn't actually want to ask anyone because it kind of changes the dynamic. If anything goes wrong, if someone's asked you to drive their car, you're like, okay, it's fine, but as long as it's at your risk, because I'm paid a pittance,
I'm not, and
can't afford to, even if I wanted to, fix it. So, and then just sort of, I kept with that rule. And I probably could have driven even more cars if I'd have just been more brazen about saying, hey, can I drive your car?
Some people are amazing at that. Like they literally just walk up to anyone and say, hey, can I drive your car? And it seems to work as well. Yeah,
and I think that kind of, they're the people who take the photos at any opportunity of the crowd. And I think they've just got that kind of front, and it's not me, and that's fine. But yeah, so I ended up getting asked to drive more and more amazing cars. And I say more and more, it was only like, 3 or 4 a year as such. But, when they're as special as they were, I was pretty amazed that I'd even been asked. And, I suppose you're only as good as your last performance. So I suppose I'd describe myself as a pretty decent amateur. I'm not a professional. I've been alongside 1 or 2 professionals as a kind of a nervous passenger and kind of had the realization, okay, right, and that's why you're a professional and I'm never going to be.
You have to be driving like 4 times, 5 times a week.
That's it, yeah. And the practice is a big part of it. I had one season about 4 years ago with a friend, and we ended up driving loads of different cars and loads of different events. And by the end of it, I'd found that I could hop in a car and be like, my quickest lap would be like my 4th lap.
Yeah.
Our 3rd lap. Because you just tuned in. And that's why pros are really kind of good, because they drive loads of stuff, a variety, and very, very often. And inherently, they're damn good.
They're good to start with. But
to start with. But with historic cars, particularly valuable ones and historically significant ones, it's not just about being quick. It's about respecting the car, minimizing the risk in how you drive it.
Yeah.
Don't dive for the gap that might diminish when you're in a, $20-something million car. You find another pass them out of the corner when it's less risky and that sort of thing. And also, it's historic racing. So who cares if you win a pot?
Yeah.
2 days later, nobody cares, even if you win a revival, really. So that's kind of, you need to remember to like leave your ego in the, the car back in the toolbox back in the paddock.
What do you think about people racing replicas versus originals?
I think it's becoming much more commonplace, and it kind of depends on whether it's a historic racing series where it's more prevalent, or one of the blue ribbon events like Goodwood where it's beginning to become more common. I kind of don't have too much of an issue with it. I suppose initially I did, and I was a bit disappointed. Then I kind of realized that in many cases it's because the owner not just wants to protect their investment, but wants to protect the originality of a car. They bought a car because that was a nicely preserved car and so on. They don't want to risk that. And I get that, But just like if you had a famous painting, you might choose to put it in a museum instead of just, hang it up down in the kitchen where your kids would draw on the wall or whatever. So I suppose I understand it. I don't have a problem if people are upfront about it, I suppose. It's the crux of it.
That's a seriously key point.
And I think as cars become more and more valuable, the truly original ones that, are incredibly rare and achieved amazing results will become museum pieces, like it or not. But the ones that people race as replicas aren't like dodgy knockoffs. They are spot on replica.
Yeah.
One guy I know, probably all of the racing cars he races, they're all amazing cars and very significant, he has replicas of. And I've seen 2 of them side by side.
Yeah.
And I'm, pretty good at identifying the cars I know, I think. And it took me a good 5 minutes to figure out which was which. They were that good. And it was literally down to the amount of dirt on the corners of welds in the chassis and, rivet heads and stuff like that. They were that good. So most people wouldn't be able to tell. And frankly,
especially if they're not next to each other.
No, and if they're on track, from a spectator perspective, a car drifting through a corner that's in a sight to see, or a whole gaggle of them, is it any less entertaining if they're all replicas versus the original thing?
And if they're replicas,
probably not from a spectacle
they're still bloody expensive.
Yeah, I mean, look, to make a turnkey Jaguar type lightweight, let's say, or Cobra or Ferrari, let's say, particularly more so with the Ferrari, but let's say Cobra and E-Type, fairly common cars in historic racing, or common choices. You're not going to have really much spare change at all out of £300,000 to build one up from scratch or to start with the road car and race
significantly larger numbers.
If you're talking a Ferrari,
like a million,
500, 600, 700. It depends on bodywork, engine configuration, and all that kind of stuff. They're still not cheap. But I think in the future it'll become commonplace, actually, like it or not, to run replicas. And like I said, I don't have an issue if people are honest, like, I have the original one at home, or even I don't have the original one, I can't afford an original one. This is the best I can do.
Do you think there should be like if someone says, I want to race a 250 short wheelbase competition, whatever, that they should be allowed to build one and race it? A lot of me says, why not? And then some people say, okay, but they should only be allowed to build a replica of each historic racing car. So let's say there's 25 cars in period, and can be 25 replicas.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I suppose, you'll never be able to stop people is the crux of it. If you build a car.
The only side is whether you let people enter it.
Exactly. I don't know. I don't see that will happen, or it'll turn out quite like that. What annoys me is when people will buy, not much more than the chassis plate. Right? Car was destroyed. Someone kept a couple of metal. Which has happened a lot in the past already, and those cars have been passed off as original with the passage of time. But people are trying to say it's more original than it is, essentially to profit out of it.
Yeah,
that I don't like them, because some poor person inevitably might not do their homework or might not speak to the right people.
Buys worth a tenth of what they've paid.
Yeah, and so they've been had, and it's kind of, you can't necessarily call it
it's fraud
in a way, because someone might not initially have done it for that reason. They might have built it.
Building the car is not the fraud.
They might have
selling it as an original is the fraud.
Yeah, and in some cases, the person who did it originally didn't have that mindset. Yeah. They may have just been like, well, I found it, I'm building it up, it is what it is. And then they've sold it to someone, eventually like 3 or 4 people down the line will be like, oh no, this is the original one.
Yeah, it gets
where's
more and more authentic every time it gets sold.
And that's where the passage of time is careful. So continuous history and provenance is always key when people are buying cars. The more paperwork, evidence and so on, the better. But ultimately, it's where it's kind of this old Ferrari classiche thing, and Jaguar are doing it now a bit, I think, and various other manufacturers, like a heritage certificate.
Yeah, all of them.
People who are new to the game rely on that too much, I think. And it may be kind of nice to have, but it can make a significant, too much difference to value, I think, to cars. And it's fine if it's kind of a road kind of like, look, it left the factory in this color with this leather and whatever. Okay, fine. But for a racing car, I think it kind of, people rely on it too much in terms of originality. And I think, no, actually, educate yourself as best you can. If you don't know what you need to know, find the right people, put them around you. And if you're passionate, you'll eventually, you'll be connected to the right people. Or go to specialists and pay them for some help or whatever.
It's worth it.
And if you don't know where to start, ring up a magazine or one of the car websites and say, hey, who would you recommend going to for advice on this car? And educate yourself as much as you can, and do as much homework as you can, and be, like the whole buyer beware thing is, really applicable.
Yeah.
And the good thing is it's harder and harder for stuff to be hidden now. Like if you had a massive shunt in a car in the 70s or 80s, maybe 5 people might have been watching it. You wipe the front end off your original Ferrari, whatever. You could stick it under a dust cover. Digital cameras didn't exist, smartphones didn't exist, the internet didn't exist. You could whisk it away home, hide it away for years, put a whole new front end on it, and then 30 years later, oh, it's 100% original.
Yeah.
Oh no, that bump, that wasn't too bad. It was just like we knocked it out. Now, like, you crash your car at Spa or Goodwood or whatever, and particularly Goodwood, you're in front of 100,000 people or something. It's all over the internet before you've even got the car back to the paddock on the flatbed. So it's harder to kind of dodge
was
that.
It last year?
Which is, I suppose, a good
before thing. That 250 GTA?
Yeah.
Now, obviously, there's a very big question because, everyone knows there's more than one of that car. But it's an interesting one because I don't know why you would race the real one in that scenario. If you have 2 identical ones, I don't know why you'd race the real one. But if you say it's the real one and the car crashes, presumably the value of the real one has to take a hit.
Theoretically, unless, if it's at that level, you can go to discerning people. Look, yeah, honestly, actually, it was a replica. The original one's at home. You can see here's the invoices for making the replica. You can clearly see the replica's the one that shunted. Look at the crash damage and so on. So I think with the really special stuff, it probably won't make much of a difference. The question is, and I've driven original stuff and raced original stuff and stuff that's just built up. So not quite replica, but effectively replica, built up from a road car. There's no tangible, you don't get more enjoyment out of driving a real one. That it might be a more special experience because you think, I'm literally sat in the seat that so-and-so sat in it, and that's kind of nostalgic in a way. On track, you're not thinking about that when you're changing gear and on the brakes and so on. You're just thinking, don't lose it. And in fact, you could argue it could be more enjoyable because you've got less pressure.
Yeah, less pressure is better.
Yeah, I raced with Ferrari short wheelbase with a friend, and it's an original car. He doesn't have a replica of that car because he's just like, well, I enjoy driving the cars. Why not? Whatever, and the family don't have replicas. It's just not their thing. And so we're driving that car, and it's, I don't know, 12, 15 million euros something. It's the car that did Le Mans in 1960 or whenever it was. And you're on track, and people are hurling Cobras and GT40s, and all up, right, left, and whatever. And you're just a bit more on the edge because you're like, forget the value. This thing's significant. I don't want to damage this thing. And so it's kind of a bit more sort of stressful in a way. Not that you're kind of like you're flippant about a car if it's a replica. You don't damage any car really.
Oh, and it's still, as we've said, they're still bloody expensive.
But you do kind of have that in the back of your mind. I don't want to be that guy who took the front end off that car.
It doesn't matter where you finish. You just don't want to be that guy.
No, exactly.
And that's basically it at any event ever. Yeah. Like whether it's a car park meet, you don't want to be the Mustang that takes out the crowd.
No, precisely. And so yeah, that's. I think it's a very personal thing. Are the replicas a good thing, a bad thing? I think it's an inescapable thing. It's happening, and it's kind of pretty entrenched now. But I think, the key is to, say, look, are people passionate? Do they enjoy using the cars and driving them? And, half of the appeal of historic racing is the social side, off track.
Yeah.
And that doesn't diminish whether you're driving a replica or not. It's a very personal choice for people, I think, and you can kind of criticize it both ways, but I think it is what it is. I think really.
What you said at the very beginning, which is it's just down to what you sell it as, in the sense of like, is it real or is it a replica? And if it's a replica, that's completely fine. But say it's a blah 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 short wheelbase CR. Or whatever.
It was like,
and then this.
Look at your Porsche.
Yeah.
Right. It's not one of the original.
It's not real.
It's 30, 40, whatever there were. But you get a lot of pleasure from it. I've heard you say in previous podcasts, it's like the last car you'd get rid of.
It is.
Because it gives you enjoyment. And if people who see it don't go, it's an amazing car. Oh, it's a replica. And
I've had people say that.
Yeah, but do they turn around instantly, walk away, and stop talking to you?
They're weird people, though.
Maybe
I've
get the odd
one person like that.
In which case,
99%.
Do you really want to know that sort of person?
No, it's a good meter of whether
they're snobs.
You want to talk to someone or not.
They're just car snobs.
Oh yeah, it's a replica, and then like exactly how their face like cringes up or doesn't. It's good.
It's an interesting one, and take the best meter. You get like a 6-year-old kid. They look at a cool car, you let them sit in it.
Yeah,
you just like
it's a cool
you
car.
Made their year. They don't go to replica. They're like, I think.
What's a replica?
Exactly.
It's a car. What are you talking about?
It's like, but this isn't the one that so and so drove. Like, who's he? I never heard of him.
Yeah, exactly.
So it is what it is, isn't
it? It is what it is. So you moved on from Goodwood.
Yep.
Your trading cars.
Yeah, I kind of not initially. It was kind of quite off market. A lot of stuff, all the stuff was off market for the first few years. I didn't advertise, have a website or anything like that. Didn't even have showroom, mainly because.
But you do now. www.jarrahvenables.com.
Yeah, and that's kind of, I suppose, because I thought, well, a lot of people in the scene know me, but maybe there's people outside of it who are new to the scene, and also it's a good means to tell people about who you are, even if they're not interested in buying a car from you, or see what you've got and so on. I suppose visibility is a kind of a good thing. And a lot of time, even people I know are like, hey, I check your website every couple of weeks. I'm like, oh, do you? Yeah. Right, I didn't know. They're like, yeah, I just, cycle through a load of the websites and people I know, see what they've got. And yeah, exactly. There's like not quite tea break, but, they do it. and like flipping through the magazines that you used to
Auto
do.
Trader.
Yeah,
or whatever.
exactly.
Exactly.
They're kind of web surfing, cruising the web or whatever. So I did that, and then I've probably focused predominantly on racing cars, I suppose. Throughout, I've been involved with the odd road car here and there, and I'm quite happy to, and I like them and so on. But inherently, I suppose I thought, you've only got so much time, and try and, if you can, focus on what you really enjoy. And for me, that's not just racing cars, but competition cars, or special rare cars, certain, one of so many that had a certain body type or whatever. Because, the reason I like competition cars, aside from the fact that I love all forms of motorsport, is the fact that everyone's unique. Who drove it, the colours it wore, the races it did, the results it had, just the battle scars, history along the way. It's kind of part of a rich tapestry of a car. And also I like the research side of it, and there's more research to do with those cars. It's kind of anything and everything really. I sort of gravitated towards racing cars, and it's sort of it's been a bit more heavily loaded towards much newer racing cars in recent years, because as the whole endurance racing legends thing has kind of developed in its various guises. And
do you want to quickly explain what endurance racing legends is?
It's a club casual club for owners of endurance racing cars, GTs and prototypes, from predominantly the 90s and 2000s. So let's say after Group C, which was kind of all dominant form of motorsport. So it's like GT cars from the early 90s was when they started coming out and replacing prototype classes, and prototypes from like 94 or so onwards up to about 2010.
How did you pick that?
Well, initially it was quite wide because we were just doing demonstrations, so it kind of didn't matter too much. Now we're doing some races this year as well. You have to kind of define it more clearly. So what we did is I wanted to make sure I saw some earlier cars out. A lot of the 90s GT cars have soared in value, blown away, and worth millions now for the big ones. And so you don't see them out very often. But I wanted to but there's still plenty of good value GT2 and prototype cars out there. And I wanted to try and make sure we saw some of those out. But if you just did eligibility for cars up to, if like you chucked them all in one class and you did them up to, let's say, like last year, inherently the competitive people are just going to go for the newest cars because they're the quickest cars. Right?
Newest, cheapest car.
So I thought, well, we want a guy to there has to be some kind of natural break point between what's a car today is a current car and the newest car in a series. So I thought a generation at least is good, right? So in Ferrari terms, let's say the 458 would act as that buffer of generation.
458,
right?
997.
That's the buffer. So the newest Ferraris you could run, let's say a 430 or a 997, and then kind of like the 991 or the 458 was kind of in racing terms the buffer generation, let's say. So I picked for GTs, I picked end of 2010. Because, really, I suppose up to including 2011, you could say, as long as it's the same type of car that raced in 2010, because in 2012, World Endurance Championship came in and kind of new generation of cars came in. Although some of those cars, like Ferrari 458, ran in 2011, but kind of a little bit grey, wasn't a clear change. And for prototypes, I did end of 2005, which is effectively kind of pre-diesel.
Right.
Just because the diesel cars, there's only really two programs out there, Audi and Peugeot, and they're both amazing cars. There's hardly any in private hands. More Peugeots than Audis. There's only one Audi I can think of, with like half a dozen Peugeots, but they're like galactically fast.
Yeah.
They are like Starship fast. And so you get some poor guy in his like mid-90s GT2 car, it might be a bit of a performance gap. So we did that, and then we made a few different classes. So we did like GT1 and GT2 for 90s cars, GT1, GT2 for 2000 cars, and then one prototype class for the 90s and one prototype class for 2000s. Just to start with, because you have to draw a line in the sand somewhere. And we thought, well, all right, well, let's see how it goes. Having listened to owners, that kind of was where we ended up. But see how it goes after year one and say, right, what worked, what didn't, format, eligibility, classes, rules, regs, that sort of thing. You can always tweak stuff going forward, because I don't think you'll ever get stuff right with something that's developing like this in the first.
Yeah, and you've got to wait until you've got like a solid grid size and...
Yeah, and now we've got like, 20, 30 cars as such in the grids, and you're looking and you're going, okay, well, 75, 80% of them are GT cars rather. And probably half of the GT cars are like at least from the 2000s. So they seem to be the most popular. Partially, maybe that's because their values were the most depressed. They were sort of almost...
What is the cheapest car? What's the cheapest car you can buy and be eligible?
Probably
Something super niche.
Yeah, I guess the niche cars are going to be the cheapest. Like from the 90s, it might be something like an Ascari, one or two of those, or a Harrier from a GT.
Yeah, I've literally
in terms
no
of
idea what
GT
these
car,
things are.
quirky little things. They made a few of them. From the 2000s.
How much would a
probably
Harrier be?
100 to 150 grand, something like that. From the 2000s, maybe like a TVR.
Yeah.
What were known as T400R, like Tuscan R.
Yeah.
That type of thing. But to be honest, there are still some fantastic value cars to be had out there, particularly if you're prepared to hunt a bit. And that's where a lot of the work can be. For instance, you can buy a Porsche with mega history, like in terms of the caliber of events. To me, it's like Le Mans is top, then Daytona and Sebring, and then certain like championships or other individual races like Spa 24 or whatever. You can buy a Porsche 996, probably an R or an RS, with Le Mans history, some form or another, for £200,000 to £300,000.
Yeah,
maybe less if you get lucky.
And a 996 RS is the old school equivalent of what the current RSR is.
Yeah, basically. So when Porsche brought out the 996 generation, which actually came out in 1999, the first one's raced at Le Mans. So two cars, kind of works cars, but it was the first time they ran, and they were a bit concerned about whether they just flop or whether they do well. They knew it should work, but was it a bit brought to the track too soon, sort of thing. So they entered them with Champion and Manthey, I think, factory contracted drivers. Yeah. The idea was if they were rubbish, they'd be like, oh, it's not a works effort. And of course, they finished first and second in class, and people were like, bloody hell, these things are good. I'd say like, oh, yes, so they're works cars. We just lent them to the teams, to develop for us. And then in 2000, you could actually, as a customer, you could buy one. Same thing, basically. And they started with 996. So it was confusing, and I don't know why exactly. There is a backstory about this. I can't remember the detail. Porsche called it the 911 or 996 is known GT3, right? Even though effectively it's a GT2 car. Yeah. Right. So in the early years, it was GT, sort of to the NGT regs. So, you had GTS and GT, was it just C? I can't quite remember now. But effectively it was like, maybe it was. Effectively it was GT. Yeah, there were GT1, GT2. Yeah. So it was kind of a GT2 car that was actually had GT3 in its model name, but that was because the road cars had GT3. I think there was a reason why they couldn't use a GT2.
2 was a turbo car.
Yeah, they couldn't use the GT2 model name for a particular reason. I can't remember why now. So they used GT3.
Probably like a homologation thing or something.
It might have been, and maybe there was someone else that used it. Anyway, whatever it was, they ended up calling the road car the GT3, and because the race car was homologated from the road car, had to have the same model name. Yeah. So they were like, okay, we'll call it a GT3. But that's a bit confusing because it's not a GT3 class car. Let's put something else. So they decided, instead of following the old system of being like RS or RSR, they came up with a new system, and it was going to be the R. So it came up with the R, which were built in 2000. Then 2001, the next generation came out, and they decided to call it the RS, right? Okay, kind of makes sense. There was an R originally in 911. Then there was also an RS. So that makes sense. Then for the third iteration, they built that in 2001 and 2. Was it and 3? I think certainly 1 and 2. And for the third iteration, they called the RSR. That was built for a couple of years as well. When they went to the next generation, they just kind of went straight to the RSR. They scrapped the system. Yeah. So it was just a 997.
I mean, that makes a lot more sense. If I look at cars available now, if someone said I've bought a 996 GT3 RS race car, I'm like, is that like a cup car?
Yeah. Well, there's also different, because people upgraded them in time, right? Because you may not have been able to get an RSR when they brought the 996 out, but you could send your engine back and have it upgraded to the latest spec. You could put a sequential gearbox in instead of a manual. You could widen track. So
does that mean the early cars? So the 996 R was that the first one? Yeah. 996 GT3. Oh, it was just the GT3 before. Was it GT3R or GT3?
The R was the first one. Yeah.
So the R is an unupgraded R that won.
Yeah.
Worth more. Okay, maybe just ignore the winning, but worth more than an RS, an upgraded R to RS because it's unmodified?
Potentially. I mean, at the moment, it's kind of
on history.
The market's kind of that young that I don't think that differentiation has kind of really cropped up too much. It's more based on history and originality.
And I guess that there's not 100 of these cars. There's not 500 of these cars.
No, unless it's completely like it literally did these races and then it was parked and it's kind of quite nice to preserve. Then I suppose, already they have some sort of intrinsic premium to that. But, a lot of cars were like raced quite a lot. And because of the nature of the car, there's a VIN number. There's kind of almost two chassis numbers. There's a VIN number and a production number, which is shell number, right? So if you had a crash racing your R, right, in, I don't know, July, say, and you had a race 2 weeks later, and you're in the middle of a fighting with a champ, quickest thing to do, you can't get a new car that quick necessarily because they may have allocated them all. Yeah. So you'd have literally stripped all the bits off, taken the days, maybe. You send the shell off to Porsche. They send back a new shell with the same VIN attached to it, okay, but a fresh shell off the line with roll cage and everything ready to go.
And you put all the bits back on.
Exactly. So those cars are usually worth a bit less.
Right.
But if they've got good history after that shell was replaced,
then it doesn't matter.
They're not worth half. They're worth 15-20% less depending on history.
But presumably if it's got better history afterwards, it's actually probably it's worth what it is, sort of thing.
Exactly. It's as good as a car on its original shell. But people just like the original shell aspect. Although you can argue if it did several seasons of racing, the original shell might be quite tired by that point and kind of a bit floppy.
And that's the angle that up until fairly recently you couldn't race these cars again.
No, so they were just gathering dust. I mean, they're sort of some were club race,
kind of pointless. Unless you were like super enthusiastic about the car and just wanted to have the car. But now you can race it. Things like having not a tired engine and like good components and stuff like that. Does that mean people will have, if you've got a significant car, I guess it depends on the value of the car, and most people, let's say if the car's worth, I don't know, if it's not considered a huge amount to them, they'll probably just keep it as it is and race it. Or if people start swapping stuff out, like engines and things.
It sort of depends. Some cars, like Porsches particularly, stick on that theme. Porsche life their engines because they're quite dramatic and efficient like that. And so they used to recommend in period that engines should be rebuilt after 30 hours of running.
Yeah.
And gearboxes are roughly the same, but particularly engines. And on the 906, like the rods and the valves are titanium. So, you might have been, because they assumed that, you'd have that's based on a pro driver, max RPM, every shift, driving it quite hard. Yeah. And we've tested this to death. We know it lasts at least 30 hours plus a little bit.
Yeah.
So that was kind of their guide. It might have been fine for 35, 40
but you don't want to be
but you're chancing your run because if something
something.
lets go, it could do a load of damage and be much more expensive than just sending off for a rebuild, right? Could destroy your engine. And so, so that people are kind of mindful of that now, particularly. So when people are buying cars, hours on engines or trackable hours on engines, particularly in gearboxes, also are kind of important to people because, an engine rebuild on even like a 996, it seems expensive at like 25,000, something like that, maybe up to 30,000. But, if you think about 30 hours, people are like, oh, that's not long, really. It's like, well, actually, that's probably more than 2.5 seasons of racing if you factor in a bit of testing.
As long as you don't do something like Le Mans.
Yeah, no, but I mean in historic terms. Let's say at the moment, there's 2 hours of track time in total at the events we go to for us, right? And so if you say, okay, you've got 5 events, that's 10 hours. That's, even if you don't do any testing, that's 3 seasons of racing on an engine, which is, pretty good mileage.
And if you know that because it's 30 hours, it's tracked. So you go, I'm doing 2 hours this week, and just like basically set aside the money like a sensible person rather than wait until the bill at the end.
Exactly. But some people I know have pegged the revs back and they change gear 500 or whatever RPM, and they're not being as hard on the cars. They've got loads more out. I mean, one guy has a 996 RS. He was telling me a few days ago he had it rebuilt and at the time put steel rods and valves in it instead of titanium.
Yeah.
And he said that engine did 57 hours of running and it didn't blow up. And they were like, okay, we guess probably we really should rebuild it now because it's still working fine, but it'll blow up at some point, right? But he wasn't using the car maybe as hard as a pro would.
Yeah.
Right? So it's easier to kind of follow the guidebook, and then you kind of, it's not to say that they don't blow up after 5 hours. Anything can happen. But, as a rule of thumb, that's kind of a guide. And I guess people like that about, the more modern cars, they're a bit easy to kind of track and kind of measure. Because the engineering, the development was just done to a different degree, more refined. But it kind of depends on the manufacturing,
Yeah, for those of people who haven't come across race cars and this sort of thing, like pretty much all race cars, I'm guessing, basically have hours. Their engine is done in hours.
Some are measured in kilometers. Some manufacturers measure, like if you talk to people about Ferraris, they typically go, oh, well, it's 5,000 kilometers.
Yeah.
Or however many thousand kilometers. And some focus more on hours. And then some life components like, wishbones or whatever and so on. Because I suppose, with an engine, it's maybe more common measure it in hours because you could have it sat there in the paddock running it. That's using up time. You're not wearing out wishbones and suspension parts and so on doing that. It's only when you're on track. So it's understandable that you might use the two. And some are kind of quite kind of vague, like GT cars are typically, sometimes they use standard production parts off a road car.
Yeah.
Like on a 996, the clutch pedal is the same plastic clutch pedal off a road car. The steering column is the same steering column. But then other bits and pieces are bespoke to the race cars. And then obviously in prototypes, everything's kind of custom. And so the lifing is much more critical. And so, even one guy, he's a specialist. I say specialist, and he's a specialist. He's a kind of guru. He worked for Audi Sport for ages. And he was telling me that back in the day when they were running the Audi, he was working for one of the Audi R8 prototype teams in the early 2000s. And they did Le Mans, right? And the wheels were lifed to be like 3,500 or whatever it was kilometers. And Le Mans was like pretty much that. And then they happened to go to a test after Le Mans. And we're like, we use the same wheels, right? They'll be fine. Look, they're fine. And they were like 20 kilometers over the life of what Audi had recommended.
Life or whatever,
And the car just happened to come in and they said, they just took off the wheels, checked the wheels, and one of the spokes had failed completely. Like, okay, they really are critical on this. So at that point on, he was like, right, you do not question anything that comes from Audi in terms of life.
Yeah, someone has thought about this a lot.
Because, you don't, something failing at the speed you can be doing in a race car might, like a spoke failing might not sound like much to someone, but when you're doing 200 miles an hour, it can be the difference between,
hitting a wall at 200 miles an hour or not hitting a wall.
The end of you and the car or not, really. So, yeah.
And also, it's so tricky with that sort of stuff is because you can't, people think they can, but you can't look at something and tell whether it's like internally
No,
nearly worn out.
Like, my dad's looked at plenty of stuff as an engineer over the years, and I've looked at stuff as just kind of,
is it bent?
An idiot, going, oh, it looks right to me, and you look closely and you're like, yeah, it looks fine to me, and then you send it off for crack testing, which is something we kind of decided to
what is
implement.
crack testing?
Crack testing is when you send off a metal component or to test if there's any cracks visible, or if they're more extensive than you might be able to see, or if there's something
basically like X-rayed
hidden,
or something like that.
Different way. So there's some people do kind of like an MRI in a way, X-ray. Some good old-fashioned way, and I can't remember all the technical terms. They're in our regs if you want to look them up. For the different names, where you literally put a liquid on and it turns like purple or whatever if there's a crack, and it focuses around the crack. And some is there's another way. I can't remember exactly what it is now. But there's different ways. So some might need to be bare metal. Some can work through paint.
Yeah.
But yeah, it might be that there's a tiny flaw, like a stress point, and a tiny crack that's hidden that you can't see. Or it might be there's a tiny crack that doesn't look like much, but maybe it's more expensive somewhere else. And so you do that to show them up. Because it could start as a like millimeter crack, and it takes one impact on a curb or something to suddenly like a crack on your windscreen, right? You get a stone chip on your windscreen, doesn't look like much, and then you hit a pothole or something, and suddenly it goes all the way across your windscreen. It's that kind of thing. Only that's not so critical. I'm going to send you off the road if that happens. But if it fails, like a wishbone or an upright or a wheel or something fails at 200 something miles an hour, you can be in.
Is that much more of an issue with the modern stuff than it is with older stuff? Do they crack test old cars or?
Yes and no. It's not so often mandatory. So you would have thought the older stuff actually would need it more because
it's older.
It's like 50, 60, 70, 80 years old in some cases. And a lot of the good specialists will crack their stuff now anyway, to be sure, but it's not mandatory.
Okay.
Is that because the parts last longer because they're more durable, because they weren't engineered to be, within an inch of what's acceptable or whatever? Maybe to some degrees. It's just that technology and know-how wasn't around at the time, I think, more than anything. And when these cars were new, at least endurance racing legends cars, they came with lifing. I'm not sure like a D-type from the 50s or whatever would come with lifing, right? So it's a good thing. It's a bit of a hassle from an engineer's perspective. You have to pull the suspension off and brakes and various other.
So if a car gets, at the moment, all the cars that race in ERL have to be crack tested.
Yeah.
Now, does that crack testing last for an amount of time?
Yeah, a couple of years, 2 years. We've also said, look, renew your fuel cell, because it's a bit like a helmet. They might be fine for 10, 15 years, but eventually they'll start to deteriorate. And so the manufacturers say, okay, from the data production, this fuel cell is valid for 5 years.
Yeah.
You can then pull them out and have them inspected. And if they're okay, they'll extend it for another 2 years. Yeah. But then, you could still use it if you wanted, but it's not deemed acceptable for racing. So you won't be able to use it in a race, but you could use it in track day or whatever. But we decided to put that in because, on the one hand, you're like, it's pretty unlikely. And on the other hand, let's say, you go through a corner, your wishbone fails in the car that you didn't renew the fuel cell in. And let's say there's a tiny flaw in the fuel cell that you haven't spotted either. It's deteriorated. It's not quite as rubbery and, malleable as it was when new, a bit more brittle, let's say. And that pitches you off into the wall and your fuel tank explodes and you get trapped in the car, you burn to death, right? That's in a worst case scenario.
Not a good scenario.
It's kind of pretty unlikely, but it's certainly not impossible to happen. So you're like, okay, well, it's a bit like people complaining about, the cost of a fire extinguisher or a better, a fuel tank or a helmet or something. You're like, look, if you're trapped in a burning car, would you pay £100,000 for your fuel tank to have not exploded?
Yeah.
Yes, is almost invariably the answer. Let's have a death wish. So it's kind of like, all right.
And unfortunately, it seems to be the case with GT cars. Even the very latest, greatest ones set on fire.
Yeah.
It just happens.
Yeah, it can happen. I've known it to happen to someone, and it wasn't even it wasn't even in that instance a fuel cell thing. It was something failed, and oil I think was gone onto turbocharge and burnt things to the ground. And sometimes no matter what you do, they go up in flames, and there's not much, you won't be able to change it, but you can certainly stack the odds in your favor. Let's say it's like risk management. It's like a well-prepared car is inherently less risky, and things will go wrong less than one someone's just put some air in and fuel.
I think there's something that put me off driving older cars, but driving old cars fast, whether that's racing or even just having an older car. Like I know with my 911 that it's pretty damn good nick, and it gets a lot of attention. At least like once a year. So I know I can drive it pretty hard and it shouldn't fall apart. Yeah. But like if I was racing something and you watch like a revival race or something, the amount of times people's like brakes like fail. Yeah. Not just like slowly stop working and then that and things like that. The idea of that
people push cars, I think, maybe almost to a degree harder now than they may have done in period, and I think pros would have pushed cars hard in period, but that was kind of their job, drive it till it broke, sort of thing, and as fast as you can, and you win at all costs, sort of thing. But I think certain things change and technological advancements happen so that cars are stressed in different ways now. You've put a roll cage in a car that never had a roll cage. You're stiffening the chassis. You're putting different loads through suspension, and everything. Maybe you're carrying more corner speed, and that's loading up more mechanical grip. And
tires are better.
Yeah, tires. Yeah, even though the design hasn't changed, and apparently they're the same tires. You've got you're able to corner faster because of other things you've done with the car. So different stress is being put on. Yeah, you see stuff fail, and also sometimes it could be because maybe components are not made in the same way they used to be, and they're made more cheaply or from less quality materials or whatever. And so
like you said, you've upgraded some components that you've had to upgrade, and that just puts more stress on the other ones. And,
I mean, for instance, like I used to race a bunch of cars at one time that had drum brakes, not disc brakes, right? So, people kind of know how that works. And a big kind of drum,
basically
usually aluminium.
Doesn't.
Well, that's the thing. Yeah, how the theory of them works, as I say, because when they do work, they don't work for very long at racing speed. But even up to, like rear brakes on cars, sometimes now, maybe not now, but not long ago, they were still drum brakes, the little ones,
for a long time.
And so it's like a drum and two shoes pushed against it with brake linings, right? So for a long time, up until even like 10 years ago, the lining material was made from asbestos. Of course, bad stuff, right? And so on. So that kind of it was made illegal to produce it, but there was still it was made legal quite a long time ago.
Yeah.
But there was lots of stock still kicking around. Takes a while to use up. And so we'd use those in racing cars because it worked fairly reliably. Maybe terrible to breathe in and so on, but actually, it slowed the car down quite effectively, and you didn't get brake fade too badly. You did get brake fade, but it wasn't like a cliff edge brake fade. So it would mean that, your brakes would last for sort of 5 or 6 laps fairly in a diminishing capacity instead of suddenly stopping working at like 3 laps or whatever, right? Which, by the way, is really not an enjoyable thing when you're sailing towards a corner and your foot just goes clunk to the floor and you're like, oh, it's not doing anything.
Yeah.
Stay under control. No, I'm panicking. Right? Yeah, and it's like it doesn't matter what you do, it doesn't make any difference. So then you either stack it hugely or become a hero with a massive power slide. Everyone's like, "Whoa, amazing!" You're like, I really didn't mean to do that. So we were using the stock of asbestos brake pads, right? And then they ran out, and the team I was driving for, they had to use like a new material, and it was rubbish. I had one on me at Le Mans, funnily enough. Like the whole shoe literally just like crumbled.
Yeah.
When I hit the brakes, and it just jammed the wheel like someone putting a stick through a spoke.
Yeah, that's good.
Which didn't cause an accident. I don't know how I didn't have an accident. It kind of spun the car around and nearly rolled it and so on. Didn't touch anything though, remarkably. Which was completely more accident than not accident, but it certainly wasn't due to talent. I was too busy, thinking I was about to die. But so materials can be of inferior quality, I suppose is the point.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's not really too much of an issue with more modern race cars, I suppose. It's like the beauty of some manufacturers now, like literally, a Porsche theme here, but it's the Germanic, and like you look through the manual, you ring up your Porsche dealer, you say, I need this and this and this for this 15-year-old Porsche race car. Yeah. No problem, you got the parts numbers? Yep, fine. Bosch will be with you next week. Oh, great. Okay.
Does that mean that some cars, and we're going to know the answer, there's obviously answer this, some cars are much easier to run than others?
Yeah.
Presumably the Porsches are amongst the easiest to run.
Yep, you can still get bits of Ferraris. You just have to go through certain companies, and inherently they're Italian and they're run by fantastic people and so on. But it's maybe not quite as efficient a system, at least. But then there's some where it's like, look, that's there were 5 cars made, and there's not like a warehouse full of parts for these. They didn't make 200 of them or whatever. So once they get used up,
that's it.
If you can't use an equivalent part from a different type of car, you're into the territory of having them made.
Yeah.
Which is pretty kind of unusual actually, because a lot of the consumable components, at least, are actually quite similar or the same.
Yeah, like a brake pad is a similar sort of thing.
Exactly. You use Brembo or whatever, and that's just.
Are the if anyone has a chance, I'd heartily recommend checking out an event that has either there's a few different groups that do the same sort of thing, but basically the Endurance Racing Legends group, any of the Peter Auto events or stuff like that. Come along and check out the cars, because I didn't realize people still drove these cars, and I'm probably quite a late bloomer into the car world and like endurance racing and stuff like that. And I didn't realize that you could buy like a 997 RSR, which for me is like one of the coolest things ever, and then drive it on a track day. Or I didn't even know that that you could own the cars. I kind of always thought they were owned by like Porsche or some, I don't know, some team somewhere. But you can turn up in anything from like
and
a TVR
there wasn't
or a McLaren F1 and go for a track
to be
day?
honest, you couldn't. And people say, "Well, what was like the lightning bolt moment as such for starting this?" And it's it kind of sort of came back gradually because after I left Goodwood, a friend who organises the Silverstone Classic said, "It'd be great to get you to organise a bit of content at the event, something kind of fresh rather than the existing grids we have. What can you suggest?" And I kind of suggested like 5 different types of category of cars, let's say, and one of them was 90s GT cars. He's like, "Oh, like what?" I'm like, McLaren F1, 993 GT2, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
It was, GT racing was mega in the period. BPR, FI, GT, and you never see. Okay, you see some of the cars, like the more exotic thing, every now and then at a festival of speed.
Yeah.
But I said, like, there were like 30 cars in the race or whatever back in the day. Where did they all go? And I've played, as many as I could on the PlayStation.
Exactly.
And I never got to see them in period because my dad was like, "I don't want to see that modern crap." And I didn't have a driving license, so I was like auto sport.
Yeah,
the internet was too painful to even bother looking at photos of cars on a 5 minutes loaded web page back in the old days. Anyway, so he said, "Okay, great, let's do that." So start doing some research. So we did I did a bit of research, and it was a contracting for his event. And the first year we had like 28 cars, 6 McLaren F1 GTRs, and I think we maybe had 1/7 that wasn't running for some reason. Yeah. The next year we had like 1 or 2 because the values even taken off that much in that time period. And so we did it the next year, and that was fine and successful. People loved it. And then the third year I was like, "Well, why don't I open this up to like later cars and a bit more, give it a bit more variety, cars from the 2000s maybe." And also by that point, owners are like, "This is amazing. Nobody else is doing something like this for us. But can we go to like more than one event, please?" And I'm like, "I'm kind of doing it for this event.
Yeah.
But I suppose if they don't mind and there's another event that would welcome us, then why not?" "Oh, okay, all right." So I spoke to them and they're like, "Yeah, go ahead. As long as we're the only event in the UK you come to." "Okay, fine." Then in the fourth year, they kind of lost a load of track time. I think basically like the marshals didn't like their day being so long. They did have a very long day, and marshals are super important, and they're volunteers and so on. So you push them so far.
I'd ditch some of the cars that don't have seatbelts personally.
Yeah, you kind of need them. When you're upside down in a burning car, you want someone to come running to the rescue. And they're amazing people. So they didn't have track time for us in the fourth year. So we decided to go to a couple of other events. And in fact, I think the fourth year was 14, 15, 16. So it was the year we met. Yeah. And by that point, we kind of formalized it into a sort of a club of sorts. And to give it a bit of an identity, we decided to do a track day just to see how that went at Rockingham. And that was cool. And then we went to the Spa Classic, and we went to Dijon, I think. Had 3 events, just as demonstrations again, and kind of our standalone thing. And then for the next year, Spa and Dijon were Peter Auto events, right? And Peter Auto, those who don't know, is spearheaded by a guy called Patrick Peter. And he's kind of become sort of the leading, or one of the 2 leading organisers in historic racing of events, like different series. So he has like 6 events, and within that there's a number of different grids that go to each of those events series.
Yeah, you need like a special book to decipher what they are.
Yeah, to a degree. And it's kind of easy for me because I'm familiar with them all. But you get like a grid for 60s touring cars and GT, and another one for GT cars, and a grid for 70s touring cars, and then one for like prototypes of this period.
This is not the names of the grids.
No, it's not. It's just in generic like loose car terms, right? It's this. It's got 4 wheels and it's this shape, or it hasn't got a roof or whatever. And then he does things like Le Mans Classic and the Tour Auto, which are kind of well-known events in their own right? And anyway, Patrick, years ago, winding back to the 90s, was doing kind of smaller events, like he'd already been doing a Tour Auto rally and so on. And then he got together with Stefan Rattel, everyone knows now from Blancpain SRO fame, right? Stefan Rattel organization. Is like the mastermind of modern day GT racing, really, for a few reasons. And Jürgen Barth. Jürgen Barth was a Porsche Works racing driver, and then managed their motorsport department in the 90s, certainly, and maybe, I don't know exactly when he retired, maybe 2000s. And they got together and created what's now known as the BPR, Barth Peter Rattel Global GT Series, right? Which ran from 94, 95, 96. And basically, after Group C, which was the dominant formula, was kind of died. There were loads of particularly amateur and GT drivers who were like, well, we want to drive somewhere and we want to drive in cars that are kind of a bit more approachable, not like extreme prototypes.
Yeah.
And also cheaper to run and so on. So it came out in that. So you'd take a standard road car in a loose term, the ultimate version of road car model, and you race prepare it. So the early cars were actually pretty standard race cars that had been road cars that have been race prepared.
Sort of like cut variant type thing.
Kind of, yeah. So you'd buy like a 964 RS, and then they make an RSR version, which was beefed up a bit and so on, but the core of the car was the same. Unlike now, like Porsche's RSR is almost a prototype with a roof. It's nothing like the road car at all. And the number of components that are transferable is
tiny,
negligible. And that took off very quickly. But it wasn't something that had in its first year or two had works manufacturer involvement. Like manufacturers build a car, you or I would buy it. We'd set up a race and we'd go racing.
Yeah.
Right. Then by like 96, it had got. The manufacturers got involved. So Porsche had a works team. BMW didn't kind of have a works team per se, but it kind of was a works team running in McLaren with the BMW engine, the FINA team. Mercedes came in 97, by which point it switched to becoming the FIA GT Championship because Patrick Peter's historic racing business was taking off. He wanted to do that. Jürgen wanted to focus on Porsche activities, I guess. And Stefan kind of ran with it, and it was called the FIA GT Championship. A GT World Championship, and he took over the running of it. And 97, 98 was like the zenith of GT racing. Anyway, so it was kind of a natural fit to getting back to my earlier point to being with Peter Auto, right? And also I knew that a key part of helping this scene develop was getting the cars, building up a good organic support base of passionate owners. And getting them on the billing, or our club on the billing of a good historic race organizer, because what that would mean is that cars that have been in the doldrums value-wise, maybe 50 grand, a couple hundred grand, 200-300 grand, let's say, where to make it track ready, let alone race ready, to restore it basically would mean often people are in negative equity.
Yeah.
So it only happened every now and then if someone was mad keen on it. So I knew if we got on the billing of a big historic organizer, a lot of people who race in their other series would look at these and go, hold on a minute, I can buy a Porsche, a Ferrari, an Aston, whatever, with mega history for a fraction of the cost of an equivalent car from an earlier decade.
Yeah.
They're too cheap. And of course, that happened pretty quickly. And so within 2 or 3 years, the values shot up. In some cases, quite a lot. You can still find plenty of bargains out there if you hunt for it. But yeah, I mean, a GT, like a DBR9 Aston Martin, 2 years ago, you could buy a car with great history for like 600,000 or 800,000 pounds.
Yeah.
Now they're like 1 million to £1.5 million or more. Lots of other things have gone up equivalent terms as well. So which is good because as they have gone up, people have been able to justify properly investing in restoring them, and they're still in positive equity. So that's kind of good. Now we've got, I don't know, haven't counted, like 50 plus. No, it must be 60, 70 cars, I guess. Had 77 at Le Mans last year, so maybe it's more like 80 that are in kind of ready to go order. Because it's, I suppose the difference also I knew is once the biggest step change in any kind of category that's going from being new to part of historic racing is when it's not an age thing. It kind of used to be, and 20 years old to be collectible. Oh boy, well, that kind of doesn't apply anymore. Because what is historic racing? I mean, I'm as old as the oldest Group C car, which is an embraced category of historic racing. I'm not historic, so I kind of vintage, historic, classic. Maybe I'm just in denial. I think as terms don't really apply anymore. I think historic racing in a broader sense means like the scene. Like you don't just go to win at all costs. It's more social focused. People are still competitive. Cars. No, they're still competitive and they're serious in some cases, but it's really about having fun, being passionate about the cars and so on. It's less to do with just an age thing. Age of the cars anyway. but I knew that a more reliable barometer is once they became collectible, and that you can tell that perception changed when people would, instead of just owning a car, buying a car and leaving it in white with Joe Blogg's fish and chip shop down the side, which is what it may have had when it was racing a club championship after its initial career. They go to a lot of effort to research it and put it back into an original livery it ran at Le Mans or Daytona or wherever, right? And to be meticulous, get all the stickers right and that sort of. That's when the cars become collectible in my, and people are buying it therefore because of its racing history, not just because it's a such and such car. So that happened certainly 2-3 years ago. So it's developing, in a popular way now. It kind of feels like it's got its own momentum. You were at Le Mans Classic last year. We had 77 cars, I think.
Yeah, it's wicked.
Almost too many.
Walking around the paddock and just looking at all the cars, and it's just mega stuff. It's all straight pipe. They all shoot flames. They're all just like the ultimate versions of things that if you're young, you'll still see the road car around that this is the race car of.
I think that's why a lot of people, and also a lot of the cars were featured in early PlayStation games. And I think for our generation, all the PlayStation I played that car in Gran Turismo or whatever. And actually a friend has a load of Viper racing cars. And when we did that track day, he let me out for like 5 laps to tootle around in his Viper, one of his original Vipers. And that was like a highlight car to me. Of all the cars I've driven, because I played that car for more hours than healthy on Gran Turismo. I think it was Gran Turismo. And I'm like, I'm actually in it's the same color and everything. It's
interior, it's like all the same. I get so many people make that comment about stuff. It's not, I remember seeing one at some race. It's, I drove that car for hours and hours and hours at home.
It's like the whole PlayStation generation thing. And it's kind of interesting because I suppose that never happened with any other.
It didn't exist before.
Cars, So, and now, people like play all sorts of racing games, simulator games and so on. And Gran Turismo probably looks quite basic compared to the sim games you can get.
But there's still Gran Turismo now. These cars are still in them.
Yeah.
And interesting, I wonder if you fast forward another 10 years.
Yeah.
And I would say that's when the people that play stuff on PlayStations are probably, some of the people are really starting to earn quite a lot of money or have a lot of money. The cars that they could play on the PlayStation when they were young, potentially are going to be super collectible.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because sometimes, if you speak to guys in their 50s, 60s, 70s, it's like, why do you have the cars you do? It's like, I remember seeing that in the showroom when it was new and I was 7 years old, or that one drove past me, or whatever. My dad's mate had one or something. I think maybe in the future it's going to be like, well, that was my garage on my PlayStation or something, and so now I've got the real thing.
Yeah, 100% that will happen.
So it's kind of it's interesting to see how it's developing, you can see that by the people who come along to the grids. There's a lot of younger people came along to the events that we go to, and I remember a couple of years ago on a message when we went to Spa Classic from some Italian guy, and he was like, myself and 3 mates, we're driving 1,000 kilometers up from Italy because you've got these 2 cars and we've never seen them in person and we want to see them. And it's like, oh wow,
and they're driving around.
Turns out it was, I think that guy who's on like loads of YouTube videos of something Steph Bozzy 19 or something like that, who uploads loads of videos of cars going around Monza. And I was like, oh, that's kind of
I've seen these videos.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, it was kind of it's nice to see that, and people are enjoying and sharing their passion in a different way in terms of our age group. Already I feel like sort of, I don't want to 36, 37. I'd like a bit of a tech dinosaur, But it's cool to see the way people are capturing and sharing and enjoying content now, just as enthusiasts, let alone. When they get the skill level of, actually a professional like, you, and, you're blowing my mind telling me about 360 cameras, and I'm like, what? I don't even know how that works, but that sounds extremely cool, So, there's...
it is cool. It is really cool. And something I remember, going to the first Peter Auto event, which I think was a Spa Classic, was the first one I went to. I was just blown away by, one, the cars that we had, running in ERL. like there was an F1 GTR, I think that first year.
Yeah, long tail. Yeah.
Like just, I'm just like, what the hell? Someone's driving this around a track. And then looking around the rest of the paddock and suddenly seeing like some cars that I knew existed and like might have had like a little model of.
Yeah.
And then that's the car. The car is there racing around, or seeing the Group C stuff. But talking to some of the owners, I don't know why, I sort of assumed that people would, they'd have one car and they'd go to the event and they would race their car with like a friend or something. And then I quickly realized that like a lot of them have a bunch of different cars, because they're like, well, I'm there for the weekend and I quite like to do a lot of racing. So they might have, with a mate or whatever, 3 or 4 cars in a bunch of different categories, and they're racing literally all day, every day. I was like,
as a theme, they're cash rich, time poor.
Yeah, very.
And so if anyone's got families, you're like, hey, darling, to your wife, I'm going to be gone for like 12 weekends this year. Probably not going to go down too well, but you might be able to get away with 4, 5, maybe 6 weekends. And so you want to cram as much into that time, or if you run a big business or whatever, as you can. Because the time is still the time away, whether you drive 1 car or 4 cars. I mean, if you drive 4 cars, you're pretty much hopping out of one and into another. But 2 or 3, certainly. And the interesting thing is, people go, well, what's the demographic? Well, it's actually kind of almost a 50-50 mix, I think, of guys of our age group in their 30s or let's say 40s, and some in their 20s, but in our age range, let's say, who maybe are unlike me and didn't grow up around historic cars, but they've made some money now and they want to enjoy cars that were out of reach yet current when they were in their youth, right, in the 90s or 2000s. But they wouldn't, they wouldn't take that money and go, I need a 1955 racing car or whatever.
They don't even,
whilst they might think they look cool,
just don't even feature.
It's too big a jump to make, right? And so, but they get cars from this age range, 90s, 2000s, let's say. Yet guys are also in it who are in their 50s and 60s or 70s in some cases. And you ask them why they're in it, and they're like, yeah, I remember the cars when they were new, but that's kind of not really why I'm into the cars so much, because they may be already racing in historics, right, in a much older car, and they look and they go, well, these things are a lot safer to start with. And generally they work more reliably, in terms of brakes, for starters.
They stop.
And also they look at them and they benchmark them against equivalent cars from an earlier decade, like we talked about before, and they go, in many cases, they're kind of still pretty undervalued. That will stop at some point.
Yeah.
But still, it's a new challenge for them. It's a new driving experience. Like people, I grew up around driving old cars with bad brakes and rubbish, tires from kind of effectively, they didn't really change or get developed since the 1950s. And people are like, well, what do they like to drive? I'm like, well, most of the time they work. There's got, in the dry, they've got not too much grip. In the wet, they've got barely any. As much grip as you might have on winter tires and snow. So, they're like, well, how is a new car, now that you've driven a few of them, like to drive? How does it differ? And I'm like, well, it's not any more or less enjoyable. It's just different, and it's a different challenge. It's like more about precision and consistency. And there's this thing called like telemetry that's a dark art. I'm like, wow, I'm just used to a pit board that's like a lap out of date. It's like, great, I've done a 210. I don't even remember how that lap went. Barely the lap I just did.
Yeah.
But telemetry is like, you lifted here, and that cost you 5 miles per hour at the end of the straight, and you're like, what? Wow, that's amazing. You don't have that on old cars, really. I mean, you can fit V boxes and things that tell you a bit about it, but you don't get like full suite of telemetry. Which in the newer cars you can get more and more of. So yeah, it's just different.
And you get a lot of people, like, I've met quite a few people that are there. It's a dad and their son comes along.
We've got a couple of guys like that.
And obviously the kid will have, this is the scenario, they've probably grown up with a bunch of the cars. But then also, if you're a younger person, you're like, yeah, but how about we get one of these, like, they seem sort of cheap when you compare them to the other stuff, but like something that I really like is more current.
I specifically had exactly that. I'd mentioned is this big collector in the scene and races loads in historics, and I'd happened to talk to like his mechanic and said, hey, just so I mentioned, there's a few of these different cars I know that are available, much newer endurance racing cars, in case the boss might find them appealing. And he's like, he's not really into that sort of stuff. I'll mention it, but he's not into it. I'm like, okay, fine, no worries. And then a couple of months later, in January, he rings me up again and he says, he sent me a list of everything that is for sale of that modern type. I'm like, I thought you told me that the boss didn't like new stuff like that. It's like, well, kind of doesn't really, but he spent Christmas with his boys who are like, I don't know, late teens, early 20s. And it dawned on him, they must have seen like some of our content from an event or something. They were banging on about how great it looked. And it dawned on him that whilst they loved the old cars that he liked and preferred, they really were mad about the newer stuff, or say newer stuff, stuff from the 90s and 2000s. Yeah. And he basically said, look, he'd built up his car collection effectively to be for his boys in the future. Yeah. They can enjoy it now, they can enjoy it together, but ultimately it's for them because, there's a lot of wealth tied up in significant cars, let's say, in some cases. And so he said, well, actually, he's told me he wants to add one or two of those cars to the collection because his boys find them more interesting. And I thought, that's quite interesting. I could maybe see that happening more and more.
For sure.
I think the future's bright. And there's another series that kind of popped up. They started doing activities for these type of cars after we did, but they started doing races before we did. Which I suppose is flattering that they kind of actually picked a very similar name, quite amusingly. Series run by the Masters, who are like, one of the other big historic race organisers, but have like Formula One where Peter Auto doesn't, for instance. And they're probably, more focused on like British entrants, whereas Peter Auto's entrance
and a lot of prototypes, don't they?
Yeah, and like I say, they've got certainly one big, maybe two Formula One grids now. They're just, it's, I think competition's healthy to a degree. And like I said, they have a later flavor. They've got, because they have later cutoff, so they've got a lot later prototypes. Right. Most of their grid is prototypes, and most of ours is GTs. And they have a much newer flavor to their grid, and that's cool. I think competition's healthy. I think it can be, to a degree, complementary. Not so ideal if you had both events on the same weekend, but that hasn't happened so far. Yeah. So,
do you think there's a cutoff point in newness that makes cars prohibitively expensive to run? Okay, there's obviously people with unlimited amounts of money may always choose to run a certain car, but presumably some cars are unbelievably expensive to run.
Yeah, I mean, if you're talking like, if you look at like GT1 versus GT2 in the 90s, there's a big difference there because most of the GT1 cars were works efforts with like limitless budgets. You can run them now. They're still expensive, but they're not, mind-bogglingly expensive necessarily. But I think if you look at how things have gone, even with the latest generation of cars, like a friend of mine was talking to one of the teams that runs Porsches, and the cost of even a corner on one of those new 991 generation, the mid-engine RSR, is insane. And a friend bought new 488, just running at Le Mans, and I think ex VAT it's 800,000 euros.
Yeah, they're basically
before you buy spare parts and so on. I think also some of them are beginning to be kind of not so much hybrid, but turbocharged, and there's a lot more electronics involved. They're more complex
and
to
the
run.
Electronic systems in them are crazy
and it's like,
nowadays.
so you can't just bring a mechanic, you need a data engineer, and you still need that with cars from the 90s and 2000s, but they're just simpler.
Yeah.
So I think it depends. I think current generation of cars will become more expensive to run relative to cars from 2000s or the 90s. But I mean, from LMP terms, I think you couldn't, even if you wanted and you had a limitless budget, you could not run like a hybrid LMP1 car. Like, you just can't buy a running one. They won't sell you one. I mean, there's only Porsche and Toyota really. Yeah. And they just will not sell one. I mean, I've heard that maybe they might sell a car, but they remove the system or disable it. Because, I mean, you look at it, they had hundreds of people in the departments running those. And I mean, I was talking to Tom Christensen's manager, because I've known him for years through Goodwood, at the weekend at Le Mans. And we were talking about how things have changed and Formula E and so on. And I said, it's interesting because it appeals to the manufacturers, probably from a PR perspective, with electrification happening and so on. He said, budget as well, he thinks, also because he said, look at the team size. They've got like 25 people to race, something like that. He said when Audi were doing like, LMP1 at its height, he said at Le Mans we'd have like 120, 140 people or something.
Yeah, the team's like 300 to 500 people or something ridiculous.
So, it's like they were like Formula One teams, same complexity, so I don't think you'd be able to run. And I think even the manufacturers have struggled with museums. I heard when Porsche and Audi brought their LMP1 cars to Goodwood that they'd run effectively non-hybrid. They disabled the systems because they didn't want to have to bring an extra like 15, 20 people to
trucks
to run
and stuff,
them. For what? To run up a hill, you can do that on the petrol power.
You've got enough power.
Diesel power, yeah, exactly. You don't need the 1,000 horsepower to go up the hill necessarily for a demo. I don't know. I find less and less clarity in terms of what the future of motorsport is like in 20 years' time or something.
Yeah, I've absolutely no idea in that time scale.
You look at like GT racing, Blancpain, and it's like bumper grids everywhere. It's doing super well. And then you're like, where's Formula 3? When I was growing up, Formula 3 was like the thing. Yeah. If you nailed Formula 3, you're like pretty much had one foot in the door of Formula 1. Yeah. You just needed a big bag of cash. Now, I have no idea. I mean, is there even a British F3 championship or European F3? I'm not sure.
I don't know.
And I know that, Formula E is a big thing and seems swimming in money.
I don't think... Formula E is an interesting one. I think it's really good it exists. I think it's a great way for manufacturers to do some positive PR for their stuff now.
The city centre thing is quite interesting, I think.
But if I look at current all racing at the moment and say what do I find interesting and what do I watch, and I didn't really grow up watching racing on the weekend or anything. So the things that I like, I don't really watch F1 anymore. I watched it a little bit, but I don't really watch it anymore because I
tried IndyCar the other day, which I hadn't watched for ages, in Detroit. It was really good.
I imagine that it's actually pretty good.
It was really quite, lots of action. The cars sounded good for starters. The drivers were quite busy.
It's fast.
You could see what they were doing because they didn't have the kind of, I know it's for safety and it's really impossible to argue against that point in a way, but I've come to call Formula One Formula Flip-Flop. And I hate how they look. But it hides a lot of the drivers' inputs.
We have so much in-car. We still have loads of in-car.
Yeah. It's more when you're just watching from a distance.
I know what you mean.
Although, Indy is bringing in, I have read somewhere, a similar thing that they are going for the shield canopy thing that Red Bull kind of tried.
I think if you look at I'm all for it in terms of the safety. And I don't really have
no, you should risk your life.
Any flip side to that. Because as someone who drives quite fast cars on track, more safety is better. Like
it's like, would you wear a helmet or not? Or would you wear? You're like, all right, I'll do it. But
like having now worn a hands device. Would you ever not wear a hands device? Absolutely.
It's
not.
easy to be the armchair critic, and it's like I know I've driven a 1950s car at like 170 plus miles an hour at Le Mans with seatbelts and no roll bar.
Yeah,
and you're like, if a tire goes pop at this speed, I'm basically toast.
But you wouldn't put a driver.
If you had the option of having a roll bar, you would. It's just in that car you bastardized.
It didn't exist back then.
You can put it in, but you having to cut it and modify it. And it's a really original car. Some owners don't want to do it, and then it's a choice you make when you get in the car. And I've done that plenty of times in the past. I find as I guess I age, and I with that maturity comes a sense of one's own
kids and stuff,
vulnerability in general terms. It's nice to walk in the door with all of your bits still attached to you.
Yeah.
I
was racing MX-5, and it was the first time I'd come across this, and I didn't even realize it was a thing, and then it scared me like shitless. Was someone said, "Oh, do you have arm restraints?" And I was like, "What are you talking about?" It's like, no, these things that like clip onto basically around your forearms, and then they tie to your seatbelts. And what they do is they stop your hands
flailing around.
I've
never encountered this. It's quite common in America. It has been for ages.
And they're like, oh no. And then one of the guys was like, oh yeah, this happened to my dad. And he was racing and the car rolled. And because the windowsill on, let's say an MX-5 is quite low, your arm can go outside the car. And his arm went outside the car and the car rolled or something. And then he basically had no arm, it was completely useless. And I hadn't even remotely thought about this as a thing. And then suddenly I was like, I don't have this. And
it's like that old thing of you can't unknow.
Yeah.
something. Once you've experienced it or seen it or whatever, and it's like a hands device. Loads of people race before hands devices.
But it didn't
now, now that they're around, people are like, oh, you're not wearing a hands device? Oh, are you sure about that? Really?
Yeah.
It was like, wind back 15, 20 years, you'd be like, well, we've got seatbelts. That's, pretty safe. Actually, about as safe as it gets. It's all.
You can't unwind safety.
No.
In terms of you can't unlearn safety, and it's not a step back. It's not a step forward to be less safe. That's never a good thing.
It's just, I suppose, how does motorsport stay appealing? I don't know. I mean, some people, a friend of mine commentates for a German TV channel on Formula E, and he said, I struggle with it. I tried to watch it on TV, found it pretty boring. It's a couple of years ago at least, so they were slower then. And he's like, no, you have to come to an event. It's completely different. Once you get into it, it's quite, entertaining. And, I thought the same before I started commentating on it. And I thought, maybe I'm just a dinosaur. But a big part of what makes motorsport spectacular, at least from my self-dinosaur perspective, is the noise. Yeah, it's like you get people filming like all these supercar bloggers, supercar kids, whatever, in London, filming cars driving by. They're not filming them for the speed they accelerate, really. It's for the noise.
Yeah. And
so I really personally just struggle with that, but equally you can't synthesize it.
I think it will be
fake noise. So
the cars are a lot faster now than they used to be. They're still not very fast, but they do funky track design and stuff. But it won't be very long before those cars are very fast.
Yeah, you're right.
And it will get to the point where they're faster than any cars we have at the moment.
I mean, hey, look at the Rimac. I mean, or the Pininfarina. It's called Battista.
Yeah, so the Rimac.
Yeah, basically, with a different body in it. Yeah, it's pretty mind blowing. I mean, a friend of mine had a Veyron and got to know. Is it Mate Rimac?
Yeah,
I don't know how you say his name. And went to visit him, and they kind of swapped cars. Took his Veyron all the way down to Croatia or wherever he is.
Yeah,
swapped cars, and my friend, his proper petrol head, was like, "Bloody hell!" Actually, I kind of hate to admit it, but that was actually better. To drive in terms of
an experience,
acceleration experience than my Veyron. It's amazing. It blew me away. And I was like, yeah, okay, well, often you can think something, and I know in like 20 years' time, there'll be some form of motorsport, and I'll probably find it entertaining. I'll probably still, reminisce about the old days of putting fuel in a car and so on. But who knows? I think, inherently, it's like betting. You can bet on flies walking up a wall if you're in a certain country, probably, or whatever. We'll find some form of.
So
that type of thing.
What do you think about the current WEC? So the current, like Le Mans type scenario.
I think in 2 years it's going to be fantastic when the hypercar.
I had a conversation with a couple of guys yesterday.
Yeah.
Or when we had it finalized that this regulations was 100% happening and like Aston was going, and all of us were like, we are going to Le Mans in 2021.
It's going to, at the minute, even friends, who are close to the ACO said, look, it's kind of in holding years. These are not going to be highly memorable years this year, next year, and so on. In terms of, in the, history of Le Mans. But I think everyone is pretty excited about the hypercar thing. Because it kind of, if you think back to it, it's like why GT1 was so popular in the 90s, because they kind of looked like road cars in a loose styling sense, but they were completely unrelated. You can say the CLK GTR Mercedes has the pointed star on the bonnet like, your old V-Class that your dad had. But actually, that's about the only similarity.
But there's also, like, the CLK GTR. There is a CLK GTR road car.
Exactly. And that was a big part of it. I think people just relate to that. As amazing as prototypes are to watch, blatting through the Porsche curves or something, and you just go, that's sped up. Seriously, it must be, because you can't humanly go that fast. It's incredible. And even speaking to people who drive them, they said they are mind-blowing to drive. But the prototypes, I think you'd have to be under the influence of quite a lot of alcohol or some sort of other substance to call sort of a lot of the LMP cars these days beautiful. Yeah, they might be in a sort of purposeful sense, maybe, but they're kind of, there's so many bits and holes and whatever that they're not kind of flowing and streamlined and so on. And so I think the hypercar thing is really exciting.
I think the hypercars will look a lot like LMP1 cars in their final trim.
Yeah, I think it's surprising how much a small bit of styling cues from a road car can make a difference in transforming it. Like, you see it with the DPI cars in America, I think. and where like it might have the front styling cue of a Cadillac or a Mazda or whatever, and it just a little bit of shape.
It's
helps.
enough. It's enough.
Yeah,
And
make it more attractive.
Like with the Aston, we know it's going to have a V12.
Exactly. Yes, and it's
you can't fake that.
I like I love diesel road cars. I love them. Call me old fashioned, I know, but I love the lazy power and so on. And it's kind of the you get plagiarized now for the whole emissions gate thing, which was not right. But like the Audi LMP cars, I watched them. I went to Silverstone for the WEC a few years ago whenever they were running there last. And it was pretty underwhelming to see it. I mean, visually it was amazing, but it was like, and it was gone. And then the Rebellion came through with a screaming V10 or something, and you're like, ow! Oh my God, that sounded fantastic. It's a privateer car. And it's kind of the same at Le Mans. I mean, this year for me, the race was in the GT class. It was fantastic.
GT Pro for me.
For most of the race, but particularly for the first hour or two, it was like you're looking at a train of cars and you're like BMW, okay, not at the front, but Porsche, Ferrari, Aston, BMW, Ford, Chevrolet, like nose to tail.
Yeah. All like making different noises, all sounding great. Yeah,
looking different. And that was the variety, the rich tapestry. I was talking to, at Le Mans, I was talking to Eugenio Amos, Automobili Amos, who's made the Futurista, which has proven kind of really popular. And I think it's a separate thing. I think it's probably a rich future for companies like that. And Singer has proven, as people like customization more and more. And he's really into he raced a bit, he still does kind of certain races and rally raids and things, but he raced in like Spa 24 Hours and Daytona and stuff. And he's he's just bought a car for ERL actually. So hopefully we'll see him out. Yeah, 430, see him out next year. And he loves GT cars. And we were reminiscing about why we loved them and what made different periods rich and so on. And it is because they sounded good, they looked good and different, and they had different drivetrains, and it was quite rich in the competition. So I think that's a really positive step. And I mean, who knows? In 10 years' time, it probably will have become an arms race, and it'll have a reset because motorsport does it. It has always done. Become an arms race. There's a good formula. Manufacturers get involved. They invest more and more and more. It becomes an arms race. Gets to the point it's so expensive. Everyone goes, this is silly, and it resets. And then maybe you get a couple of years of average regs until someone comes up with a better system. But yeah,
I think it's cool. It is just cool.
Whether they get rolled out in terms of national series, I don't know, because GT3 and the whole balanced performance thing seems pretty popular and seems to work well.
Yeah.
But I think that will probably stay as it is. But it's going to be cool. I'm not going to miss 2021 at Le Mans. That's for sure.
Yeah, it's going to be sick. Like just those cars banging around a track. I was at 360, the guys that look after my Radical, this week, and I was asking them about, because they run an LMP3 car. In fact, I think they run 2 LMP3 cars now, in the ELMS.
Yeah.
And I was asking them about the different speeds between all the cars. So they on their races they have LMP3, LMP2, and GT3.
Yeah.
Also GT3, LMP3, LMP2 in terms of speed. And I was just asking them, like, what's the speed differences between those 3 cars and the cost? Because I always find it slightly funny that my Radical, which you can go and buy for an SR3 for like 45 grand, they're like 70, 80 new. But like if you get one that's been run for a little bit, and that will lap Silverstone, which is not a particularly great track for a high downforce car, in 2 minutes 4. And GT3 cars have only just got faster than that.
Wow.
And a GT3 car is like, 500 grand, something?
New, I suppose, got to be, several hundred upwards, doesn't it?
So that's always quite funny. An LMP3 car apparently is about 3 seconds faster than a GT3 car. An LMP3 car costs 200 grand to buy. And it looks like a full-on Le Mans. I mean, it is a Le Mans prototype, big carbon body.
Yeah.
I think they're 400 and something horsepower at the moment. That's going up next year. But to run one for a year is not cheap in the slightest. No. I think it's 600 grand.
Okay.
Which is, I mean, that's a lot of money.
In anyone's pocket,
split and then you have 3 or 4 drivers. So I guess you would then split that between those people. And then LMP2 goes up to like $1.5 million a year to run.
Yeah.
And those are 10 seconds a lap faster than LMP3.
Quite a bit.
But as a driver and having the experience of driving the Radical, I don't know why you would pay to go to Le Mans in something that's slower or as fast, but spend a shit ton more money running, for example, running a GT car. I love GT cars because they are the embodiment of all the road cars that I love. But to drive one on track, I imagine is pretty great, but they're not.
That's why LMP2 at Le Mans has been so popular, right? Because LMP1, the few privateers there are, is that expensive.
Insane, yeah.
LMP, and you look at the GT cars and you go, okay, it's going to it costs you basically €1 million to buy a Ferrari or presumably if you could get a Porsche, not dissimilar. Ford owned all the Fords. I think it's just for one.
Yeah.
Rumor has it was like, I don't know, $3 or $4 million.
Yeah.
It's pretty punchy money. And yet you go and buy an LMP2 car for, I don't know, 400,000 or 500,000 or something like that, maybe a bit more.
And run quite a bit faster.
I don't know, but it is part of where the value of GT3 cars in the usability, because there's probably only, 2-3 different series you can run an LMP3 car in, or LMP2.
Yeah, not many.
With GT3, you can run them in Blanc Pan, you can probably run them in National GT Series, British GT, maybe French GT, ADAC.
And they're
America. There's a lot more usability.
They're pretty user-friendly as well.
Yeah.
I haven't driven a GT3 car. I'm sure one day I'll get the chance somehow, somewhere. But from all I've heard, they've got like all the driver aids, and they're reasonably friendly to drive, and they're designed to be reasonably friendly.
Yeah, that's part of their appeal. Right?
I don't think an LMP2 car is very friendly.
No, I suppose. I'm the wrong person to talk about downforce. It's a mystical kind of dark art to me. Like speak to Sam Hancock, and who's historic racer and raced prototypes and stuff when they were new. And now races in historics, he was commentating at Le Mans and so on. And he'll say, actually, prototypes is a misnomer. Prototypes are easier to drive because they've got so much downforce, whereas GT cars a bit more weight and less downforce, so they kind of move around
a lot more.
But a lot of people think, yes, but downforce, it's that thing where you go through the corner at like 80, or you go through 140, but if you go through 110, you'll fall
physics
off.
Doesn't actually work like that.
No, but a lot of people kind of automatically think like that.
I don't know where that came from.
I don't know.
Someone somewhere said it.
Who created that?
It was probably on like Top Gear 10 years ago.
Maybe it may have been true ages ago. I don't know. But
I know with F1 cars,
get put off by that.
There's certain stuff like tires. If the tires aren't hot and the brakes aren't hot, they don't work. So if your tires are not hot enough, and you only get that by driving fast, you're not going to be able to go. That's when you might have a car that's nuts.
Yeah.
But my own experience of driving, I don't know what you'd class a Radical SR3 as, but in terms of downforce versus a road car, or you get these latest hypercars like a Senna or something, they say, it's got 600 kilos of downforce at 180 miles an hour. Now, what that equates to at a normal speed, like 100 miles an hour, is not a lot of downforce. Whereas I think my SR3 has 600 kilos at 100 miles an hour. Now, the way physics works, if you could get that car to 180 miles an hour, that would be something like 4,000 kilos of downforce. In terms of a number, if you want to quote like for like, one of those is feelable. Yeah. And when you drive, I thought there was this thing of you can go through a corner 20 miles an hour faster or 20 miles an hour less, but there was no middle ground. And then the first time I think it was at Silverstone and Copse, and we looked back in the data after I'd been driving, and there was a lot of stuff which was like my line wasn't quite right and turning point, and you start to have to do things like really get the balance of the car correct to get the aero platform flat and stuff like that. But we looked at the data, and the guy, it was probably actually Ollie, so Sam's brother.
Yeah, he's a great driver.
He he was cornering at 20 miles an hour faster through cops, which is like a blind, fast right-hander. And in my head, I was like, that just sounds loony. And then we were like, okay, fine. Just try it 1 mile an hour faster than you did last time. And then 1 mile an hour faster. And literally just slowly. And this feeling of of pushing, it just feels like you've got more grip.
Yeah.
But it doesn't. In that car, I think it's reasonably friendly when you lose it. Because if you suddenly start sliding, you lose a lot of the aero very fast.
Yeah, I suppose it's
and I think some cars are particularly aero sensitive in that way, that if you get over 2 degrees of slip, you suddenly lose half the downforce or something. And in which case you're gone. Like you're not coming back. And the slick tires don't have as much lateral angle you can put on them.
I guess people who don't have that explained to them well, they get kind of scared about that. I suppose that's where a lot of this whole misnomer comes from.
Yeah, definitely. And and actually I could see how an LMP car would be easier to drive, because it's just faster, more of me driving the Radical, which terrified me the first time I drove it, because I thought it was going to kill me for some reason. And then I realized it's actually it's a really friendly car. When you're on that knife edge,
it's familiarity that looks like the first time you drive a car, it's a step up in performance. You're like,
first time you drive a rear wheel drive car.
Yeah, you're like, oh my God. And then you get used to it. And then it's suddenly not that scary until you make the next step up in performance and then kind of have the same thing again. So it's interesting. I mean, the other thing is, I think, like you see it a lot in historics. People, make a lot of money, buy a valuable car, sometimes a fast, valuable car. And it's kind of a case of all the gear, no idea sort of thing. And they spend loads and loads on trying to make the car go faster. And the reality is, it's probably a lot cheaper and easier to make themselves go faster. But it means that they need to acknowledge that they're not as good as they think they are, and to ask for help, basically. And so that's why I think the value of people like the Hancock brothers, and there's loads of other people out there who are good at tuition, but not just like the basics of race tuition. Like, they've driven a load of different stuff. Yeah. They understand how different systems work, different types of cars, rear wheel drive, GTs, prototypes, downforce, no downforce, slicks, non-slicks, all of this stuff. And they can kind of coax you along, say, just be mindful of this, watch out for that, because they've been there and they've done it. That's actually, I think it's incredibly valuable. And for people coming into it, it's really worth spending the money on that. Yeah. Because you'll learn so much in a short space of time that you might spend ages floundering around for a year just trying to figure it out, or more than a year. Yeah. Yourself.
And there's certain things you don't learn. You can't work out yourself. Like, you have to be taught. Yeah. And I think
it's the knowledge thing, isn't it?
It depends on the mindset of the person, really, because you get some people get super successful, make loads of money, and they sort of 100% put it down to themselves being amazing at everything, sort of thing. And then they come into cars and they may be super successful in something else, which they do know a lot about, but then they assume that they're going to be immediately very good. And then I think that's not a lot of people like that, but more people come in and you realize there's a lot to learn. I think a barrier that people have, and I find it amazing. When I was testing the Citroen C1 the other day, there was a bunch of guys in Ferrari 488 Challenge cars, and I got chatting to one of them, really nice guy, and I said, like, have you done much track driving, or because you suspect that this may not be the case, and he was like, no, this is the first time I've really been on track.
Oh wow!
And I'm like, oh, so you decided to buy a 488?
That's a fairly quick car. As your first car,
Challenge car, as your first track experience. Like, what? Why didn't you just think, oh, let's get something slow?
I'll tell you why. Because the salesman was really smooth.
Well, yeah, and also I get it, because you're like, okay, I've got a Ferrari road car and I want to do some racing, so I want to get the Ferrari race car.
And they feel part of that family, and it sort of makes sense.
And if you've got the money, or if you've made the money, or in whatever form, you've got the money to spend on it, and you go, okay, I can afford to do it that way. The only answer is that's probably the best way to do it. I think the more you do get involved in racing and have good races and bad races and whatever, you realize that the car is the smallest part of it.
Yeah, and it's interesting in terms of what's fun, right? Because inherently people go, oh, I need to go for performance and prestige and so on in order to have more fun. It's totally not true. I mean, you've done Citroen C1 racing, which I have to admit I haven't done, but I'd really like to in the future. It looks like outrageous fun. And I know a number of people who are, who've raced all sorts of cars, some of the most valuable cars in the world, and even in the top races in the world, like Marino Franchitti.
Yeah.
He's driven loads of different racing cars. Yeah. And he's won Sebring, LMP1 stuff. And he was doing the Citroen C1 24 hours. And, you ask him, like, what's it like? It's like ridiculous fun. It's like, probably the slowest racing car you can buy. But it's actually still a challenge.
Unbelievable fun. And when you look at the grids at an event like that, you get people like him. You're looking down the list and you're like, hang on, this is like a Works GT3 driver over there. And then this, and you're like, okay, everyone's racing a C1. And it is definitely a common theme. The more I talk to professional race drivers and people that have done a lot of racing, and I give them like, okay, you can race what for you is the most enjoyment you have racing? And none of them have said, oh, this car, this. It's like, I just want to have a good battle. And you tend to get better battles when the cars mean value-wise less to the people racing them. Yeah,
and it's also it's. I think
good talent grid as well.
It may be you need a lot of experience and be razor edge in terms of reflexes and skill and so on to drive the absolute fastest cars available at any moment in time. But it's still surprisingly difficult to extract the absolute performance from any car, no matter what it is.
Yeah.
Whether it's a Citroen C1 or a Porsche 917.
Slow cars, you get punished.
Yeah, well, that's it. Because you got no power. You scrub speed and you're just sitting duck. And I love the aspect of the fact that they seem to have radios in them.
Yeah.
Like
part of the race.
Like you have to keep the radio. I want that to be in Formula One. I want Lewis to be blatting around listening to Radio 1 or
losing signal the back end
exactly.
of Spa.
You got the dance tunes on or whatever as you're going around Le Mans. I think that would be hilarious. I wish it could happen.
It's all good fun. Right. I have a couple of sort of news related items from recently.
Go on.
Of things that have just happened.
What's been going on?
Other than Le Mans, obviously. Ultima have made a new car.
I saw, I don't know any details.
It looks sort of the same.
I saw a photo of it somewhere.
Ultimate
Maybe it was on
RS.
Facebook or social media or something.
I actually have minimal details on this. Other than it, if you've seen an Ultima, it looks kind of like an Ultima.
I thought that.
And the engine is various forms of American V8. And it can go from 480 horsepower up to, there's this hypothetical top version that could potentially have 1,200 horsepower.
Turbocharged, I assume.
I think it's turbocharged or supercharged.
Is the chassis much different? Is it metal or is it carbon?
It has carbon parts on it.
Right.
I don't actually know the answer whether it's a carbon. I don't think it's a carbon tub.
What's it meant to be? Like a track car?
It's a sort of track ultimate performance vehicle that you can buy.
Kind of exactly like the original one in a way.
Yeah, it's just more of the same. And my only experience of an Ultima was a friend bought one. And the thing with Ultimas is you can either have it built by Ultima or people can build them.
Yeah.
And this one was built by someone else. And it was the most heavily botched, sketchy thing I've ever come across. And like genuinely...
Like an IKEA supercar.
I'm surprised it didn't set on fire whilst we were doing a road trip.
I wanted to, when I saw the original ones, I was like, it kind of looks quite cool. And I like it in some ways in terms of how raw it is and so on. But
it's a cool idea.
I suppose it's a good, and I don't know, what this one's like. So, it's unfair to judge it, but I suppose it kind of raises the point that, it's easy to do something, even if it's something that's been done 1,000 times before, it's easy to do it very badly.
Yeah.
Or you can do it very brilliantly. It's like, Singer. Why is Singer go? Well, they customize cars effectively.
The execution.
But they customize them. It's to an unheard of degree, or it certainly had been.
Yeah.
There's plenty of car customers out there, and even expensive ones, where, they're really not my cup of tea, but like Mansory.
Yeah.
And I look at them and I'm like, oh dear, that looks like an extremely expensive kind of Alfred's knockoff sort of job. And maybe it's changed the performance of the car. I don't know. But,
they're not performance related.
That's what I thought.
It's an aesthetic.
But I didn't frankly stop long enough to even read the description. I just saw it and thought, whoa, I'll move on. But yeah, it's easy to do it kind of badly, I suppose, is my point. But you know, there's some out there like, you know, I'm trying to think what they are that are kind of really kind of niche in a similar.
I guess it is the sort of
that have been executed well.
It's the car for. So I haven't seen one that's been built and executed. I've only come across
like
one.
BAC Mono. That's kind of an equivalent type of very, 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 very niche thing that actually, having seen up close, I was really impressed with the execution of it. I don't know what
an amazing bit of kit.
But like an aerial again. I don't know if they're much better now, but they were actually at the time basic but nicely executed.
Yeah,
and I think that's kind of the key is in the execution.
And people love good engineering.
Yeah,
people are willing to pay.
It goes to show that you don't need complexity; you just need to engineer and finish it nicely. I think that's when we say execution, it's like, okay, the fundamental engineering needs to be good, but the finish is really what sets things apart.
Yeah,
be it a watch or piece of furniture or a car, or whatever.
And it's crazy how much the finish, like tiny things, completely like just destroy the perceived value of an object. Like I bought a watch. It was about a year ago. It was some guy in Sweden, I believe, had come up with this design, and it sort of looked a bit like a old school Daytona. That was the sort of vague design ideas. Anyway, I bought it. Thought it looked kind of cool when I saw it on the web. It arrived, and I just looked at it quite closely. And I hadn't really started looking at watches closely until someone asked me to photograph a watch a couple of years ago. And I gave it back to him and said, I know this is a customer's watch. He'd customized a watch for someone.
Right.
He'd customized a Rolex. And I was photographing it, so looking at it very, very, very closely. And I just gave it back and said, look, I basically can't do this. There's some stuff you need to do to this watch before you give it. I know you're delivering this tomorrow and it's not in a condition to do it.
Yeah.
Like, we're kind of done. But looking at this watch I just bought, one of the dials, like just looking at the dial, it wasn't quite finished properly. Like something was out of line or whatever.
Yeah.
And basically from that point, I think, what was another thing? Oh, you just couldn't really read it very well.
Right.
You couldn't read the dial very well, which sounds like an obvious thing.
Yeah.
But like my Submariner, super easy to read. Like simple. Obviously, it's a nice watch.
Yeah.
But I hadn't considered that people might have made one that you couldn't read. And I literally was like, I can't read this. I've got to get rid of it. And I sold it to someone and it's gone. But it gave me a whole new appreciation for the design and execution on watch faces. And when you really look at them, which potentially just don't ever do, like a card, never look at the paintwork unless you really want to know what the paintwork's like.
It's a curious one. I mean, it's like I whilst I used to be pretty unimpressed with what have been for 10, 12 plus years with Formula One, and thought the cars were quite ugly actually. And I was like, oh, can we have the 90s back or the early 2000s when they're much cleaner designs? Actually, I still found them fascinating to look at up close.
Up close,
just
they are unbelievable.
Not moving. And I happened at Goodwood one year. Adrian knew he was down, and he was talking me through the car they had at the time, the show car, which is still a couple of years old, but it was still pretty advanced.
Shapes.
I never looked at one too closely. And he was telling me what all of the different, like, I said, well, why don't you have this funny kind of bit there doing like curving up that way? He's like, oh, so that cleans the air and that does this. And then that has an effect like at the back of the car. And I'm like, I would never have thought that funny little thing there made a big difference. Once you knew it kind of made sense. I wouldn't say it made the thing beautiful, but it was interesting to look at.
I just recently read his book. And
I haven't read that yet.
And I'd recommend it. And it's made me more interested in Formula One throughout the years. And also, I now have a better understanding. Basically, the premise of the book is he sort of tells his career to date. And each year, that's based around designing a car for a company. And he talks about the different regulations and stuff and how things get banned, and comes up with a new idea and then that gets banned or whatever. Because I'd always look at the current cars and go, okay, that's the latest, greatest, fastest. That must be the best thing exists. But actually, it's exactly what they can do now within the parameters that they are given. And each year they get tighter and tighter and tighter, so they have to do less. And you sort of want a bit like the Aston Martin project, the Valkyrie and things like that. where you want to see I really want to see what someone can make.
Yeah.
No holds barred.
Yeah. And it's kind of, it's like Can-Am if you look back in motorsport history, which I loved because there was loads of variety in Can-Am. You know, okay, many people went down the route of putting a socking great big Chevy V8 in the back and a kind of a bathtub aluminium monocoque. But there are some people who, you know, really obviously had a spliff or were quite drunk when, or you know, were really alternative thinkers when they penned their designs. You know, it's like one bloke thought he'd lash together 4 or 6 snowmobile engines to make an 800 horsepower 2-stroke flat, whatever it was. Can't remember now, configuration. And then, you know, another guy decided to put a massive fan on a car. It's just, you know, they were completely free.
Yeah.
And it was brilliant to see. Most of them didn't work, or not for very long, but it was brilliant to see the variety of thinking. And I kind of...
That's cool.
I like that.
Speaking of fans on cars, Gordon Murray has announced his T50, I believe it's called.
Yeah. But what's it going to be? Is it going to be called a Gordon Murray? Or is it going to be called going to be named?
Well, at the moment it's the T.5 or T50 or something, but I'm sure it'll have a different name when it's finished, or it might be called the T50. I don't know.
Yeah.
So that, if you don't know what that is Gordon Murray, who was part of the designer of the McLaren F1, loves lightweight stuff, and he's put together a car that is, I don't know how long it's going to be till it comes out, but fundamentally it's going to have a 650 horsepower
Cosworth, is it?
Cosworth V12.
Is that the same engine as in the Valkyrie?
No, it's smaller.
Oh, okay.
It's smaller displacement, but it's going to rev, I think they said was something like 13.5 or something crazy like that.
I'm excited already.
It's going to be manual gearbox, and it's going to weigh, he set a weight target of 1,000 kilos or less.
So is it, it's basically, I'd read a news snippet which had a quote from him. It's basically kind of like, you know, he made the McLaren F1 as good as he could at the time with the technology available. Yeah. And this is kind of sort of, you know,
similar
the
concept.
Same kind of philosophy, but, you know, better because of the technology and materials and, you know, and so on, evolution.
He's, I mean, to me, it sounds
3-seat,
mega.
Right?
Yeah, it's still 3 seats with space for luggage, and it's going to fit inside the footprint of the car is quite small. It's like smaller than a modern 911 or something like that.
Wow.
I can't remember exactly what it is, but it was basically, it's not going to be a huge car.
Huh.
And it's priced at €2.5 million, which nowadays I think they're making 100, and there's all sorts of problems that I sort of think down that lines of like, who services it?
Yeah.
You know, you haven't got a big manufacturer
brand
making
pedigree.
it. Brand.
I mean, okay, he is a brand, he's got pedigree, you can argue. And you could say McLaren didn't have a pedigree as a road manufacturer. They were massively successful as a racing car manufacturer. But
they still had that.
They had that. And although he's kind of got that in a personal sense, there's not that kind of brand there. And it's like people say, well, what's a brand worth? How do you kind of value a brand? It's like, well, it's kind of, you know, what they did in the past and what they're doing now and you know, how popular they are. And, you know, it's a kind of, if you look at it, you know, it's how much want there is for that, I think. And I suppose that's the only thing. I really like the idea of it. I wonder, you know, what, you know, like resale values will be in 5 years. 5 years after that.
Probably do what an F1 did. Start high, go down.
Yeah. At one point, you couldn't give an F1 away for, you know, a few $100,000.
I was listening to. It was Chris Harris's new podcast recently.
And David Clark.
Yeah, with David. And he was saying the cheapest they got was like $300,000.
Yeah. And, you know, it's still a lot of money, but compared to what they were new.
And at the time, they were $300,000 because people didn't want to pay $310,000 for them. Like that was the price. Yeah. It wasn't like, they're massively undervalued.
You know, the interesting thing, I think that, I don't know exactly, but in a rough sense, that the value, you know, McLaren F1s became super valuable. Now they're, you know, like high teens, you know, to in the 20s for one of the race cars, let's say. So yeah, certainly in Euro terms. The race cars, at least, which are kind of the rarest, let's say.
Yeah.
You know, they made 18 short tails, you know, the GTRs and 10 long tails. they were kicking around, kind of a couple of million, probably, up until not an awful long time ago, less than sort of 10 years ago, I'd say, something like that. And I personally started to observe that F1 values generally, and particularly those of the racing cars, started climbing up once McLaren started making road cars again, which was like, 2005, 6, something like that, I'd say. Certainly once the Mercedes SLR program came around, that kind of put them on the map a bit, but particularly once the M412C came out, which must have been, what was that, 7 or 8, or that ballpark. And I think the brand exposure, because ironically, in a Formula One sense, their success was going the other way at the same time. I think that my point is the values went up in line with the rise of the brand.
Yeah, I don't think it's...
So I wonder
it's definitely a bit... I think that's got to have been a big factor, because more people know the brand name, and, it is considered, it's in their history. And then when the P1 comes out, and that's a £1 million car, and you're like, okay, well, what came before the P1? You're like, well, kind of was the F1. So the F1 is more historically significant. It's a really cool car. It should probably be worth more than a P1.
Also, I wonder, and I don't know enough, so I could be talking out of turn here, but it's really expensive. I know it's not a hybrid car, but it's still really expensive to make a properly engineered supercar, hypercar, whatever you want to call them these days.
Especially if you decide to make not a lot of them.
Yeah, I was like, where's the money, coming from? Because you can kind of understand it if it's, like Bugatti, part of the Volkswagen Audi group, they're worth billions or trillions or whatever. Or even McLaren, where there's serious kind of backing behind it. I think, where's the money going to come from to properly engineer and finish this in a way? I mean, you could say, okay, and where's the production skills going to come from? You could say, okay, but the red, the Aston Martin Valkyrie, that's a genius designer, but, where's that going to come from? Astons are good, but they're not, but they've not been kind of that level necessarily, maybe. But then you go, okay, well, they're employing Red Bull Technology as kind of a partner in it. And
they have a dealership network.
Exactly. So it's, I heard that they've got a new production facility, which is apparently going to be quite impressive.
I don't know.
Somewhere not far away, I think. But still, I don't. It's a bit like when the TVR kind of came around last year. Was it something as a bit amazing new production facility?
That was the last thing he was involved in, wasn't it?
Yeah, and that kind of looked all right.
Where is it though?
It was going to be in Wales, I think, and it was kind of partially government funded subsidies and all of this sort of stuff. And I guess it's still going to happen, but like it seems to have gone quite quiet on that front. I think it's easy to talk stuff up, but delivering it's another thing. And if anyone knows how to engineer a car and deliver it, he'll know for sure. So it's like all of the other stuff I wonder about.
It's interesting. I find it a really interesting car. I think I would have to have really quite a lot of money and a lot of cars and really like him and the process to buy one. But there's a lot of people out there, and I reckon it's going to be wicked. I hope it goes really well, because it sounds...
It'll be cool. I like variety.
My type of car.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, on paper, it sounds...
I don't really get the point of him tying into this Brabham fan car concept, of the race car he had, because this is a road car. And
well, also maybe this is work. Maybe I'm being a bit.
Or why do you want that on
a bit of a Sergeant Sensible here? But like, I drive around West Sussex. I live near Goodwood. Yeah, the roads aren't great, to be honest. There's plenty of potholes. Yeah. And when you get potholes, you get broken up bits of tarmac and gravel and stuff. I'm like, how is the fan not going to suck up
all this?
Yeah, rubbish. And, basically like, it'll be like having a machine gun go off inside of a fan, blow the bits off the fan blades. And I mean, because in equivalent terms, that's like saying, you chucked a bucket of gravel at a jet engine. Yeah. Well, when a bird hits them, they like land a plane, the engine's, toast. So how... Maybe there's some clever way around that.
Presumably there must be some seriously, like, to me, it seems just a bit odd as like in reality, how's this going to work? Because, okay, if it's on a track, the car's going to have some sort. Those cars had skirts that went down to the ground. Now those wear away, and you're replacing and whatever.
And look, knowing Gordon, he was famed for being a practical engineer. Yeah. He'd probably look at me like I'm an idiot and go, bit of mesh will stop gravel, or something like that. And I'm like, I didn't think of that. That's quite obvious. But it's exciting. And
I am waiting. So I hope round 1, car 1, T50 goes exceptionally well. And I hope this forms a more extended venture, in which case we get the lower down cars. For example, like with Aston Martin with the Valkyrie, we've got the one in the middle, and we've got the baby one coming
003.
003, and then the Vanquish or whatever it's going to be. So we will have a Gordon Murray inspired, let's say, if he could make that car for under 1,000 kilos, I reckon rather than having a 13,000 RPM V12, I would happily have a 11,000 RPM V8 that was only 600 horsepower, and a car that weighed 1,050 kilos, because I'm sure that last 50 kilos is like, I mean, all of it, I imagine, is very difficult, but have a smaller V8 rather than a bigger V12 or whatever, and have it for £450,000.
Yeah, same philosophy, different architecture. Yeah, I agree. And I tell you what, I hope they don't talk it up too much. I hope they just deliver it and let the product do the talking.
Under promise, over deliver.
Yeah, because it's so easy. You're setting yourself up to fail if you do it the other way.
The only thing is, obviously, that they want to sell them all before they've made them all.
Well, that's the thing. That's when my point comes about when I made the question of like, where's the money coming from to make it? Because is it a case of we need you to pay for the cars so that we have the money to make cars?
Presumably there will be hefty deposits.
Yeah, in which case a lot of people might go, well, what if you're only, you're going to sell how many? 50?
100.
100? What if you only get 50 deposits? Yeah. Are you going to burn through our cash and then go tits up?
Yeah, and we don't get the money back.
Literally a rolling chassis. Yeah, and I suppose that might put some people off who might want the security of a massive manufacturer.
Even if you'd ordered your Valkyrie.
Yeah, it was like £600,000 or £700,000.
Yeah, I think the first one, I think there's been two deposits, and they've both been hefty.
Yeah.
And the car is not, it's not on the road yet. So
I don't know. I don't even know if the road. I haven't seen any road.
It's not on the road.
And that was like 2 plus. Was it 3 years?
Yeah, those first deposits were a couple of years ago.
I mean, that's like
there's a lot of interest that you're not getting on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's in child terms. It's like you start. Okay, you haven't got kids, but I've got kids. So all December, you're like, look, behave. You better be good. Santa may not come.
Yeah,
all December, like pretty much your daily basis. You're like, he's watching you. He's watching you. Don't mention it the rest of the year, but you're like, be good, right? It's a bit like saying, right, January 1st, Santa's watching. You better start being good right now. Yeah. I know it's an intangible amount of time away and you can't get your head around it, but that's
you need to pay for your presents now.
Yeah. For Christmas, 3 years away.
Yeah.
I'm like, what?
I hate waiting for cars. Like
well, we're in that instant society, aren't we? Click, buy, boom. It's here the next day. Yeah. Amazon Prime Star, right? Or whatever it is.
But I love it when a car manufacturer, they might tease a concept and then they release the car and the order form opens that day and they're delivered 3 months later. You're like, oh, wow, this is actually like soon. But waiting for a car, like if...
It can work against you though, because it did with like Toyota did it with the Lexus, let's say. And I think to a degree... Maybe also like the 918, but particularly the Lexus, because they were testing that thing forever before they delivered them to customers, like literally years. And like by the time it landed and people got their hands on them and took them to events, be like, oh yeah, one of those. Yeah, we've seen that kicking around doing road testing for like years. It's not like people are like, because
they had with the 918, they had the 918 Spider race car, which was the road car. It was like literally looked exactly the same as the road car, but the road car wasn't out yet. And they had Porsche, being Porsche, the first cars and the first numbers they released for the 918 were, X amount of horsepower. Let's say it was like 800 horsepower or something. And this weight and blah, blah, blah. By the time the production cars came around, they were like over 1,000. It's something like that.
Yeah.
Like when they've put 918s up against other stuff of similar, weight and whatever, and they're like, hang on a minute, this car is really fast. I'm like, well, that's classic Porsche, isn't it? But no, they're like genuinely like 200 horsepower more than they said they were going to be 2 years ago. But that makes sense.
It's like people kind of, I think a long way is a tricky thing. Equally in today's society with smartphones and so on, it's actually really difficult to keep stuff under wrap.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. And it takes a long time to develop these things.
Yep. Yeah. I used to know, I still do a bit, used to deal with Chris Goodwin quite a bit, who was a development driver for McLaren a long time now, I think.
Now Aston Martin, yeah.
And anyway, pretty much every time I ever spoke to him on the phone, because he used to race at the Revival a bit and come to Festival of Speed, I'd ring him up. It was a foreign ringtone. Where are you? I'm in Africa. I'm in South America. I'm in, Asia. I'm in Norway. He was road testing.
Yeah.
I mean, the hundreds of thousands of miles that guy must have done in a year was insane. I mean, he basically must have spent probably 3/4 of his life sat behind a wheel in literal terms.
Yeah.
But anyway. So
it's crazy. So I normally wrap up these podcasts with 5 questions.
Shoot.
First one.
Okay.
Do you have a most memorable driving trip or journey? Or
like road trip, not driving a
road. Car? The last person I had on, I think I applied this. I said, your most memorable racing, because he'd done a lot of racing and couldn't. But if you think one of those stands out more than the other, from like an enjoyment, like
well, it's easier to think of race ones, I suppose, and road ones. But I did kind of a long drive. I did a rally, the Tour Auto rally, actually, in 2016 with a buddy, and I'd never done an event like that. I'd heard about it and so on, loads. And it's basically 5 days of special stages and circuit, kind of sprinting, and then a lot of road driving, like 2,000 kilometers. And we did it in a 911 2.7 RS lightweight, not dissimilar, let's say, to your car. And we kind of shared the driving. So he did the special stages, I did navigating, and then we shared the road driving, and I did circuit stuff. Kind of worked well. That was fantastic. It was hard, but it was just long days. But it was fantastic because it was like, boys road trip. We didn't have time to fiddle around with our smartphones. We weren't
just having a wicked time,
calling back home, 3 times a day or whatever. It was pretty cool. In terms of other drives, there was a car I kind of worshipped, a guy racing old pre-war Grand Prix, like Formula 1 car. Formula 1 didn't exist pre-war. I used to worship when I was growing up. Oh, he's just awesome. It was black, and they're extremely rare. ERA it was called, and it's like a 1.5 liter straight 6 supercharged twin cam thing. And they're one of the few, in my opinion, beautiful pre-war cars, as well as being purposeful. But they weren't like the ultimate unlimited category. They were literally like 1.5 litres. That was a limit. But they packed a lot of punch. For a pre-war car, they made like 200 horsepower, maybe a bit more nowadays, which is pretty impressive when you consider what a road car at the time made. Anyway, a few years ago, I was in Australia on a business trip in Melbourne, and the Grand Prix was on. So I was like, okay, I'll go and have a look. There was a historic demo there, which I kind of sort of forgotten about, really. And my friend was there, who I'd known for ages, who has one of these cars, a sister car, also in black. So exact same type, looks the same. And I'd always thought, racing cars to drive. But I'd never kind of really been super keen to drive a pre-war car because there's literally no seatbelts.
Yeah, there's nothing.
No. A very comfy car, armchair-like. Anyway, he's like, well, we're doing demonstrations. There's, like 4 25-minute demonstrations, once each day. He said, why don't you have a go? Get lost. Like, seriously? He's like, yeah, I've done 3. I don't want to do 4. And, in figurative terms, chuck me the keys because there's no keys. So I had no suit or, anything, race suit, helmet or anything. So I borrowed that and I wore the trainers I had on, Converse trainers, and drove that. And that, to me, out of all the cars I've driven, was kind of special, but particularly because it seems so far out of reach when I was 7 or 8, whatever it was. So that was quite special. I suppose racing a 250 LM at Le Mans, which is, it's like, an evolution, the later version of the GTO, let's say, you could argue. The engine in the back, they made less than 40, I think, from memory. And it's in my favourite colours, Maranello Concessionaires, which was a UK importer, and they were red with Cambridge blue stripes on them. And I never thought I'd drive any of those cars, let alone one at Le Mans. That was quite a pinch me at a moment.
Yeah.
And even better, I forgot to put my earplugs in at the time, so I absolutely deafened myself and was shouting for days afterwards. I just only realised on the warm-up, like, Jesus, this thing's really noisy. They're in my pocket. Well. that was cool. And actually, I suppose the third one was my first taste of McLaren F1 when I drove a friend's road car. Not far, just from Goodwood down to Littlehampton, which is a journey I never thought I'd actually do in anything, really, and say it's memorable, because Littlehampton's not terribly memorable.
Yeah.
To anyone who lives there, it's not that amazing. But there's a really striking cafe right on the seafront there. It's won all sorts of architectural awards. And it's basically, it looks like kind of a sort of a bit of log, really, on the beach, which is meant to look like a bit of driftwood. And it's metal, and it's rusty. However, they just left the finish at rust intentionally, but kind of curvy, funky, sort of organic-looking shape. And we drove the F1 down there, which has famously got Reg F1 Joy.
Yeah.
A dark blue one. I think it's called Genesis Blue. I think there's only two in that colour. And we drove it down to do some photos, and the backdrop and the drive down there, was pretty first experience in an F1. And I'm like, how do I drive this thing? He's like, well, put the key in, pretty much like any other car, you'll figure it out. He was right. It's actually incredibly, it has this kind of mythical, out of reach kind of status. Yeah. And don't get me wrong, it's an incredible car from a performance perspective, but very analog, and it will bite you hard if you're an arse in it. But it was actually incredibly intuitive and ergonomic. I was so surprised. Okay, it's not the easiest thing to get into, but in terms of driving, it's super ergonomic and incredibly docile at like 40 miles an hour. Some supercars, they really don't like low speeds.
Yeah.
And I suppose that was quite impressive.
I mean, there's some good moments.
I sound quite incredibly spoiled thinking about it, actually. But there's loads of drives I want to do. It's like the company often makes a drive.
Yeah,
really.
Definitely.
Like some of our road trips have been really fun, going around in my old, smoky diesel estate, down out to Spa.
Yeah, it's been good. Yeah. Right, next question. 5-car garage, and it's unlimited value. The only caveat is it has to sort of fit into your current lifestyle.
Oh, right.
So you might need.
I've got 4 kids, so that kind of basically rules out 99% of cars, isn't it? Can I leave some of the kids at home? Is that?
Yeah, well, you might have one car that's like the family car,
right?
And then some other cars.
Okay.
If you had to list 5 cars that have that many seats,
all right. I think I'd selfishly, for the selfish drives, or the road trips with my mate or my wife, maybe on the mythical occasion we actually ever go away without kids together. I would go for a Singer. I haven't driven one. I can't wait to. One day, hopefully, I'll get the chance. I love their detail. I think I spend a lot of time drilling over it in the garage. But I love how analog they are, and how it's a kind of a pure driving experience in a way.
An unbelievable sweet spot, isn't it?
Yeah, it seems to be from people who've driven them. And it's not because of the hype. I actually thought they were kind of they're an overrated thing. Because I saw one at Goodwood once. We had one at Goodwood. And I was like, oh, that's that bloody modified thing everyone's raving on about.
Yeah.
Overpriced pile of shit, And I thought I'll walk up and spend 5 minutes looking at it. I was there for like 45 minutes. I genuinely surprised myself. I was like, okay, now I get it. So that would be one. I think I would have a 250 short wheelbase Ferrari, because in terms of, I think 60s was a real sweet spot from any manufacturer, particularly Ferrari. They have very curvy shapes. It doesn't look bad from any angle.
Yeah.
Okay, people go, but you haven't said the 250 GTO.
Nah.
I love them. I really love them. I'm lucky to have driven one. And that was a special occasion in itself. It's also my wedding day, so that was a very special day for that reason. But if I had the choice, I didn't think a 250 GTO was proportionally that much better than their value is over a short wheelbase.
Yeah,
you can tell it's lighter and lower and more performance oriented, sure, and it's stunningly beautiful. I just personally, I love the back end of a short wheelbase. It's a nice ass as cars go, Yeah. And also you can go on holiday and take kids to school, go to the shopping. You could go to a concours, race it, rally it, whatever. They're incredibly versatile. They're from that kind of period where the race cars can be road cars. But, you could use them for both. So that would be that. McLaren F1.
Yeah.
I flip backwards and forwards. Yeah, I think I love the rarity aspect. I love the thing. And I love the fact they have a competition history. I equally love the purity of the road car design.
What about LM? It's like a middle point.
You mean the long tail?
No. Just the road car LM. So it has the GTR body styling.
Oh, yes.
Interior.
Sorry, I was miles away.
GTR
I was
engine.
talking about the homologation ones they did for the long tail where it had no wing and it really doesn't work for some reason, in my opinion. Yeah, that's a sweet spot. If you could get one of the 6. Yeah, that would be, I don't know, but if I was going to have the wing and stuff, I'd go, you know what, I'll have the race history.
Yeah.
I mean, I love the rarity side of it. But I think, 18 versus 6 is still pretty rare. So I don't know. I flip backwards and forwards between that. I think I'd go for a race car.
Back to back to decide.
Yeah, exactly. And because I think, the short tail race cars, by all accounts, if they're being modified to use on the road, aren't, ask Dean Lanzanti, he knows far more than me, aren't that different to drive. The long tails probably are different gearbox, lock, ride and so on. But I think, if I was going for a race car, I'd probably go for, sorry, Dean will shoot me if he's listening. I can't remember the chassis off the top of my head. But the West car, which is a short tail race car, but had different headlights and a few other different details on it. And it was also, I think, one of the winningest GTR chassis. So
what colour is that?
It's white with red.
Oh, okay.
West cigarettes.
Yeah.
German brand, or big in Germany anyway. So that would be, what am I up to now?
You're 3, I think. Done Singer. T50 short base.
F1.
You need some sort of daily family vehicle.
Yeah, I'm quite, 4 kids. I do like the idea of an estate.
Right. Okay, so there aren't many estates that you can have seats in the back.
4 seats. I mean, okay.
There's things you can. Okay.
My Merc has that, but it's an old smoky diesel. So, there are some of the punchier estates I quite like.
But they don't have that many seats.
No, like the E55, I don't think.
None.
The old one had.
I don't think any of them do anymore.
No.
Some of the SUVs do.
So I'm just going to have to throw
Tesla does.
Go, you know what, I'll leave some of the kids at home and they can take the bus or something. And kind of, because otherwise it somewhat, stifles your choice. Estate-wise, I'm not. A lot of new cars don't do it for me. They lose character. They become more generic, I think. I quite like the Audi RS6. I probably go for I think it was an RS6 before that had not the one with the Lambo V10, although that did sound quite impressive. I like the practicality of a boot, being able to sling a load of stuff in it. I quite like the. If I didn't have an estate as a runaround car, I'd probably go for the 90s M5. The was it 40? No, not 46, 30. What is the V8? The curvy one in the mid to late 90s. That one.
I'm not sure. That one.
Yeah, I
don't know.
I thought that one was a great car. I drove one once. Although, good luck probably trying to find a tidy one that's not.
This is all hypothetical.
Being abused. I know. I think about
GTR in the garage.
That's true. You never know. I may get the combination right on the lottery numbers one day, and it will become a real problem, first world problem. So I think I'd like something performance-y and practically.
Estatey, yeah.
Probably, if I had the choice. But equally, you know what? I do kind of I suppose it's a bit of a dirty habit. I do quite like G-Wagons. Not the blingy ones.
Yeah.
Just the longer wheelbase kind of practical sort of ones. I like how utilitarian they are.
Yeah, they are. I drove the new G-Wagon and it's great. Like, it's genuinely great.
Yeah.
I've driven the previous gen.
I don't know how different they are, but
they're very different.
Are they? Oh,
the previous, so I've driven the 63s of both.
Yeah.
And the new one I was very shockingly impressed with, actually. And the only thing I don't necessarily like this sort of image.
No, I'm slightly put off by that in a way.
I slightly prefer the Range Rover vibe to the G-Wagon vibe. But if I had to own one of the two cars, I potentially have the G-Wagon, ignoring values and whatever.
Yeah.
It's just a bit cooler. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I'm going to text you at some point later on and be like, no, I've forgotten. What was I thinking? I've forgotten this and this and this. I know. I'll be driving around thinking, what about that? But equally then I think, I kind of fancy like an old Defender or even a Willys Jeep, something that I can you know,
Just
if I had the imaginary house in the country, I can say, right, let's drive the Willys Jeep or Land Rover, whatever, into a blackberry bush and stand on the bonnet. And yeah, I quite like what they do in the same singer sense.
Yeah.
I spoke to one guy once who had an Icon, was it a Bronco or something? I can't quite remember. And he raved about it, really raved about it. I haven't seen one up close to judge, but I you know, yeah, I kind of.
There is also a company that does old style Range Rovers, but singerized.
Yeah.
Someone was telling me about them the other day, and I was like, oh, that's quite. I mean, obviously, people are going to do this stuff for all sorts of things.
But yeah, and we're just to clarify, these are all road legal cars. Like I can't pick any.
You can have a race car.
Oh,
you can have a race car as one of your 5.
Oh, I didn't realise that.
I have I in my 5, I'd have a race car which I would race.
Oh, I hadn't realised that.
You've got one more slot.
Yeah, I've got something practical. You get the idea of the theme.
Yeah.
And also my point, I suppose, on that 4th one, it is not being exactly sure what it is. I think cars very much depend on, you know, where you are in your life.
Yeah,
you know, the car I would use my everyday car when I was in my 20s versus now will be completely different. And versus even 20 years' time, you know, I won't need to pack a load of kids in it and so on. But race car wise, oh, geez, for me, it's like, have I got a list? Can I have 100, please? I don't know. Short wheelbase, you could also argue is slightly a race car. F1 GTR, technically sort of race car. I personally, I think would be a Viper or like those.
Not an F1 car from.
That you know, in the sweet spot, late 90s, screaming V10 McLaren MP4. Was it 17, 18, 97, 98 Hakkinen car? That's a stunningly beautiful car, I think. But equally, you know, 917, that's a scary, beautiful car. In race car terms, I'm going to regret this because there's so many, to be honest. To pick something kind of different, See,
if for me, if it's a race car, it's sort of got to be modern safe.
Yeah, I get that.
But that's
equally, I love the 70s
like
because it's like
no
bag packet. You know, they had seatbelts in the 70s and weren't terribly effective. But I love the 70s high airbox Formula One era.
Yeah.
But equally, to me, one of my big passions is cool liveries and long tail race cars and high airbox F1 cars. So it'd probably be something from that category: long tail Le Mans car, which is purposely made for Le Mans, like long tail 917 or 512 Porsche or 936, something like that.
Yeah.
Or it would be a high airbox F1 car from the 70s. Or it'd be, you know, an art car, something like that. You know, one of those.
You've got to pick one.
Oh, do I have to?
One car.
It's okay. It's going to be a Le Mans car. I'm zeroing in on that because at least there's a little bit to go crunch around you more than an F1 car. I'm probably gonna say like a 512 long tail Ferrari.
Cool.
I think. There you go. I'm not happy that I had to just settle on one, but if I had to.
There we go. Next question. What's the most undervalued car in terms of price that you can think of at the moment?
Road or race?
Me either.
I'll probably focus on race. I'm not so clued up on road cars that are undervalued necessarily. I think, they're not everyone's cup of tea with the headlights, but I think 996 racing Porsches, I bang this drum a bit, I think they're quite undervalued. They were actually quite significant in Porsche motorsport terms. You know, they're arguably, I think, their most successful GT racing model in RS or RSR spec. If you just count that generation, than any other previous generation. They won major races, championships. They won Le Mans Class 6 years straight. They won Daytona outright, Sebring, all the different championships. They were a big step change in design as well, the Porsche. Yeah. Not just water cooled, but in terms of the architecture of the car,
big change.
Chassis and so on. And you can pick up a car for less than 200 grand with pretty decent history. Probably 200 to 300 with something of like Daytona or Le Mans or Sebring history. And I think that's an awful lot of history for your money if the history is important, side is important to you. So that's what I'd be putting my money in.
Cool.
At the moment.
Right. The final question. what is the most interesting car to you personally at the moment? You might have Googled recently, or like you think about quite often, or
new car.
It doesn't have to necessarily be a new car.
Interesting. Trying to think of what's out there.
Anything's at like the front of your mind.
I've been, lots of things stick in my mind, but for the wrong reasons, in terms of like, these hybrid supercars and, all that. And I get about pumping out too many special versions. One of only so many. I'm like, oh, come on.
Yeah.
Didn't you do that like last week?
And they're doing the power, not weight. They're going for power.
I know. It's easy
weight.
for any idiot to put their foot down in a straight line. It's not like, it doesn't make the skill fun. Comes from getting something through the corners. Good question. I keep coming back to, and although I say I'm inherently an old car guy, not a new car guy, I keep coming back to the Valkyrie and the new 2021 regs.
Yeah.
But for endurance racing, because I think that would be, assuming they can make it work, that'll be quite an exciting car generally as a road car. But also with the regs being reset and the cars being, similar, let's say, a bit, I think it's quite an exciting time. So I'm interested to see what the rivals come up with, because they will.
Yeah, and we're sort of reliving that moment when the original F1 came out. Okay, you can't do it now. We would drive to Le Mans and go and win, but you're potentially you're gonna see an outright win from basically a car that you can sort of. And
it's also out of all of the, there are plenty of supercars, hypercars. You could have called them, I suppose, now. Back in the early 90s, which is prime before becoming the big pop, and a lot of the companies, made a handful and then went tits up. And some of them are ridiculously complex. And actually, then the executions thing that we were talking about was pretty rubbish. But the F1 was at the time, and is still head and shoulders above any of its competition at the time. And the only people who got remotely close to owning cars were cars that were basically race cars that they then made one road car of to homologate for. I wonder if the same will happen with the new regs in 2021 and forwards. Will the Valkyrie be that much better and more revolutionary compared to its rivals in the F1 was?
Yeah, I think unlikely, because there's some big hitters like Toyota, for example, are making a car and they're making it to win Le Mans, and they're going to make some road cars. Now, that may not 100% be a correct statement. They have not said this, but if someone like Toyota wants to win, their budget is quite a lot bigger.
Yeah,
than Aston Martin.
Yeah, but it comes down to kind of the brand, the mystique, what makes McLaren so valuable. It wasn't just that it was a seminal moment of design in terms of the philosophy and materials and lightweighting and so on. It wasn't just that it was the last genuine production-based road car to win Le Mans. I think it was the whole philosophy and kind of buzz sort of behind it in a way that's kind of created the mystique that exists now. And it's like if you look at the Toyota car from their LMP car, which is technically meant to be a GT1 car, but it was basically a prototype in disguise. That was ultra dominant in 98, 99 at Le Mans. And there's one car now, we had it running with us in the club last year in a demo, the only one in private hands, and it's a sensational thing. People love to see it. But its value is not remotely near to that of an F1 road car, let alone GTR. Maybe it's a few million euros, 4 million euros, something like that. But F1's like, race cars like 20 plus. So I wonder if that would be the same.
It's never going to have...
Some brands just struggle to shake that stigma of being a bit
it sort of
beige.
Depends on what your brand does for its day job.
Yeah.
Like, Ferrari make cool sports cars, McLaren make cool sports cars, Aston Martin make cool sports cars. Toyota, you don't go, oh yeah, they make cool sports cars. It's
like if Casio came out with the most revolutionary mechanical watch that they did. Hey, we've just been developing this in our spare time. It may be revolutionary and super technologically advanced and so on. You'd be like, yeah, but you're Casio. Like, you also make calculators and digital watches. Struggling a bit to get enthused about that. In the same level I might about it, like if you're into watches, George Daniels or I don't know, Patek Philippe or Zenith or Richard Mille or whatever. So yeah, it's going to be interesting. I'm excited.
It is definitely going to be interesting, and I think we're all like want to see these cars.
I'm just
hear them.
I think the worst bit in a way is I'm like, oh damn, I have to literally wait an entire motorsport season plus the winter bit.
Yeah.
Before we get to it. Yeah, I mean, I know there'll be testing and so on, but it's like, now I know about it. I'm annoyed to wait.
Yeah, I'm still looking forward to the day I see a Valkyrie drive past me on the street.
Yeah, I think I'd probably I'll go, ooh, that sounds cool. And then chase after it, hoping that I get to look at it at the lights.
Yeah.
Well, chase after, I'm not pretty out of shape. I won't really, if it goes more than the block, I'm screwed. But I think having just seen the concept mock-ups and so on, I think there'll be a jewel to look at in detail.
Yeah, I think the final version is going to be sick.
So, yeah.
Cool. Well, we've actually just ticked over 3 hours since I pressed record.
Have I set a new record?
That's definitely a new record.
Oh, God. Is that maybe that's a good thing or bad?
I don't know. Well, it's good job that we have it recording over there. Because I think that all the other video feeds have gone.
They've given up. They're like, oh, God, but anyway, still waffling on.
Thank you very much for coming on.
Hey, thanks for having me.
You can find Jarrah, if you're 3 hours and 2 minutes in, I mean, fair play. You can find him on his website, www.jarrah, Jarrah, Venables, Venables.com.
Yeah.
And also on Instagram.
Yep. I think it's just my name, Jarrah Venables.
Jarrah Venables.
Yeah.
Or follow the Endurance Racing Legends.
Yep. That's got a website.com. Yeah.
Website, Instagram.
If they're this far in, frankly, if I bump into them, I'll buy them a beer. I'm quite impressed.
Cool. Well, thanks for coming in.
Thanks. Cheers, Sam.